All right, it being 6 p.m, I will call the Chamber to order and declare open the Ordinary Council meeting of the Shire of Capel for March 2022. We wish to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land we are meeting on, the Wadandi people. We wish to acknowledge and respect their continuing connection to the land, waters and community. We pay our respects to all members of Aboriginal communities and their culture, and to elders past, present and their descendants who are with us today and those who will follow in their footsteps. Before moving on with the rest of the meeting, I'd like to again highlight the Shire's new and updated Acknowledgement to Country. I mentioned this at our February Council meeting, but unfortunately, due to technical difficulties with our live stream, not all participants heard this important message. The new acknowledgement has been crafted in consultation with the Underlup Association, and more specifically Elders Wayne Webb and Sandra Hill. The words in the acknowledgement more accurately reflect and pay proper respect to the local language group, the Wadandi people, that have the original connection to the land, waters and culture throughout Capel. These are their words, and they have chosen them to be the Shire of Capel's acknowledgement. The Shire has strong initiatives in terms of reconciliation action and a good working relationship with the local Wadandi community and their representative elders. Updating our acknowledgement is another important step and the first of many more joint initiatives that will be undertaken in the future. Record of attendance. We have full attendance of the Council tonight. There are no apologies and no leaves of absence. Response to previous public questions taken on notice, there are none. We now move to public question time. Question one from Mike Norton of Capel.
Hey, Mr. Chairman. Point up Yards again, unfortunately. Things have changed a little bit since your February meeting in the animal welfare field. I spoke with Lynn Bradshaw, Chairman of the RSPCA the other day. They've basically been sidelined so far as large animals are concerned, that they've been relegated to cats and dogs and in urban areas. All the power and animal welfare supervision now has gone to DPIRB, and the Minister has set up an Animal Welfare Advisory Committee. So the Minister now is in direct control of animal welfare across WA. On that particular committee, there's a lady by the name of Dawn Lowe. I've had a lot of dealings with Dawn. She used to picket every live sheep ship that come into Western Australia for a long time. She has done audits on sale yards right across Australia, and she's done audits on the Bourne-up yards and dubbed it as the worst sale yard in Western Australia, and that's where that statement comes from.
Thank you, Mr. Norton, but this is public question time.
Yeah.
I'll ask you to move to your questions, please.
And that leads into the question, Mr. Chairman, that at your January the 19th council meeting, council agreed to also give a 10 by 10 year lease. Everybody that I've spoken to believe that's a 20-year lease, or the opportunity for a 20-year lease. And after the February council meeting, you came out and made a public statement that you hope the Shire would move to a new sale yards within 10 years, which is a little bit contrary to your January meeting. So I guess the question is it now the policy of the Capel Shire councillors to have the Bourne-up sale yards relocated within 10 years, which I think is a good outcome? And if so, when and how will the planning of this project start, and who will manage the project?
Thank you for your question, Mr. Norton. Part 5 of the Council decision in January 2022 committed the Shire to commence a full consultative process involving government, industry and key stakeholders to identify and develop a long-term location and solution for the sale yards within the Shire of Capel, but away from the Bourne-up town site. The Shire has already submitted a funding application to the South West Development Commission regarding the first step, which is the site identification, constraints and opportunities study. We are also actively engaging with the state government on this initiative, including meeting with the Minister in the next couple of weeks. The Shire will manage the process when the plans to have the first phase of the work commencing immediately in the 2022-23 financial year. This allows the Shire to allocate funds to the project and ensures that the Shire takes the lead and does not rely on others.
Okay, which leads into the second question. since the Shire meeting in 23rd of February, Walser have made public statements to the effect that they are not interested in spending or the amount of money on buoying up sale yards with only a 10-year lease option and not another 10 years as well guaranteed. They have stated publicly that may be interested in a short-term lease arrangement, which leads to the question, how short will that lease be, and who will do the upgrades needed to keep the buoying up animal welfare sale yards compliant, plus all the other management orders that were in that January motion that's required, that management orders required for the next 6 to 10 years, which is about the time it takes to buy land and build the sale yards, and while the buoying up sale yards being relocated.
Thank you again, Mr Norton. The decision of Council from January 2022 remains unchanged in that the lease period will be 10 years plus a further 10 years by mutual agreement from both parties. Walser are responsible for providing the capital upgrade plan and management plan before the lease will be signed. Walser will be responsible for completing the work in accordance with those plans and to comply with all relevant legislation and regulations, including animal welfare and workplace health and safety.
Well, it's going to be an interesting exercise, isn't it? Thank you.
Mr John Hawkins of Capel. Is Mr John Hawkins here? Sorry. Yeah, well, we'll read out Mr Hawkins' questions. The first question he submitted, are the councillors aware that this area should have been considered back in 2015 in regards to the Capel River area, when it became law for people to have a chance to put in submissions every 5 years who were not told of this policy? I heard it on local ABC radio. The response to that question, the new planning and development local planning schemes regulations were introduced in 2015, which require local governments to commence a review of their current local planning scheme within 3 years and review the new local planning scheme every 5. The Shire commenced the review of the local plan scheme number 7 in September 2015, with the Capel River area and your submission, Mr Hawkins, considered as part of this review, as outlined in the agenda item 14.1. The second question submitted by Mr Hawkins, have all councillors read my submission? The response to that is that your submission was included in the agenda item 14.1, attachment 4, schedule of submissions as submission number 14. Question number 3, why is the area different than others that have been allowed to subdivide in this Shire and around in neighbouring Shires? And I'll ask the CEO to provide a response to that question.
Thank you, Shire President, through the Chair. This part of Capel River that Mr Hawkins is referring to and including his property is proposed to be zoned rural in scheme number 8 as it currently is in scheme number 7. Any proposals for rural subdivision has been considered with regard to the State Planning Policy 2.5, Rural Planning, which allows for rural subdivision, including for rural residential, in certain limited circumstances. Officer's advice is that it has not been demonstrated that the Capel River area meets the criteria for rural residential subdivision at this point in time. However, Council has been advised that, as a number of individual landowners in the area have proposed the subdivision of their property through the scheme review process, an early review of the local planning strategy, once adopted, could be considered in order to re-examine the issue.
And the fourth question provided by Mr Hawkins, are the councillors aware that about 2 years ago, a Shire of Capel senior planner was on the verge advertising for submissions on this very subject? I spoke to her a couple of weeks before she suddenly left. She had worked on it for 2 years. The response to that question is that the Shire has provided previous correspondence on the matter in 2019 from the previous Chief Executive Officer and the Planning Officer. The next lot of questions come from Doug and Tracy Tame of Gwyndanup. They have advised us that they will not be attending tonight, so again we will be reading out their questions. Council's original planning approval in 2013 stated that the extraction operations would not come within 500 metres of our residence. Council is now recommending approval in which extractive operations will now be 40 metres from our boundary fence, 100 metres from our residence. Operations being so near our home is going to impact our peaceful lifestyle, such as dust, noise and visual detriment. Taking into consideration that we have lived at our residence since 2005, never failing to pay rates, can you please explain why the Council considers our lifestyle less important than the applicant's development application? We request that in the event that the Council does recommend approval for the development application, that a larger setback be in the area to enforce, that a larger setback area be enforced from the northern boundary which shares our boundary. And I'll ask the Chief Executive Officer to provide a response to that question.
Thank you, Shire President, through the Chair. And just to clarify, Mr and Mrs Thames' question is in relation to item 14.3 of the agenda, lot 287 Lowry Road, Boynup. And the response is, the area of extraction operation approved in 2013 was for the most westward section of the overall site and was over 500 metres from their residence. Council are now dealing with a new application for a more easterly and central section of the site, with the last stages of the proposed extraction area located 100 metres from the closest resident at lot 26 and 200 metres from the second closest resident, lot 100. Detailed in the report in the agenda, Shire officers raised concerns with the initially submitted noise assessment, with the applicant being required to submit a revised noise assessment in July 2021. The revised noise assessment projects that noise levels at the dwelling on lot 26 for the final stages, at the closest, of the proposed extraction will be compliant, subject to the following proposed control measures for excavation operations within 100 to 150 metres of a residence. Crushing and screening plant will remain located in the previously approved pit, more than 500 metres from the closest residence. Provision of a 4 metre high noise bund at the top edge of the pit at all times. Crushing and screening will not be undertaken at the same time as excavation operations. A Cat 972 loader will be used, as this item is 2 decibels quieter than a Cat 980 piece of equipment. The dozer will not be operated at the same time as the loader and will not be operated for more than 24 minutes in any given 4-hour period. Operating hours for the site will be limited to between 7 AM and 6 PM Monday to Friday, with no operations on Saturdays, Sundays or public holidays. The proposed 4 metre high noise bund will be progressively relocated, i.e. moved eastward, as extraction moves closer to the neighbouring houses.
Next question, Hayley Bennett from Gwindenup. Oh, Helen Bennett, sorry. Get my glasses.
All right, I can speak in front of 100 people, but this is giving me the jeebies. Helen Bennett, 4 Dempster Street, Gwindenup, and it's about the extractive industry on lot 287 Southwestern Highway, Gwindenup. My family have lived in our current residence since the 1970s. I am now the 2nd generation to own this property. I am seeing the bushland surrounding Dempster Street being slowly but surely denuded by extractive industries. The vegetation area of 11.33 hectares, which is proposed to be cleared, is an integral ecological link between the 2 Shire reserves and also forms a natural windbreak. Clearing of this land adversely affects a lifestyle, which is why I live in a rural area. To allow it to proceed, we are taking the habitat away from many flora and fauna that we who live here know depends on this corridor. Can you justify taking the results of a brief survey over the accumulated knowledge of many years?
Thank you, Ms Bennett, for the question. I'll ask the Chief Executive Officer to provide your response.
Thank you, Mrs Bennett, and through you, Shire President. The proposal is based on clearing of 11.33 hectares of native vegetation, and of this, 5.46 hectares is proposed to be rehabilitated to native vegetation. In addition, it is proposed that 14.64 hectares of blue gum plantation outside of the excavation area will be harvested and rehabilitated to native vegetation. Together with the 7.69 hectares of remnant native vegetation to be retained on site, the proposal will result in a total of 27.97 hectares of native vegetation compared to the current 19.02 hectares. This will result in a net gain of native vegetation of 9.85 hectares. The applicant will also be required to obtain a clearing permit from the Department of Water and Environmental Regulation. If this is not achieved, the operation would not be legally able to proceed.
Okay, question 2, same issue. To prevent some of the noise and dust, the applicant proposes to erect buffers, but as this is very steep and falls away sharply, many of the activities creating noise and dust will be at elevations above the batters. Therefore, we believe the batters will have little effect. Has the Shire taken this into consideration? Can the Shire please explain how the noise prevention will be effective in this case?
Thank you again, Ms Bennett, and I'll ask the Chief Executive Officer to provide your response.
Thank you, Mrs Bennett, through you, Chair. As mentioned, a revised noise assessment was required that includes several specific control measures to reduce noise levels to be compliant. These included the construction of a 4-metre high noise bund that will be located on the top edge of the pit and will be relocated as the excavation moves eastward, closer to neighbouring houses, including yours. In relation to the dust, the proposal includes a dust management plan to minimise off-site dust generation. Specific measures are proposed to reduce the potential negative impacts of dust on surrounding properties. The plan also incorporates a monitoring program and complaint procedures.
Thank you, Ms Bennett. Michael Tichbon of Gwindenup. Read on his behalf by Donna Brown.
Thank you for your time to consider Michael's questions. It's regarding extractive industries in the Shire of Capel, rehabilitation with native vegetation in gravel pits. Michael was the founding member of the Capel Land Conservation District Committee, which is known as the LCDC, and has a lifetime knowledge of environmental issues in the Shire. And he writes the following questions. I'm increasingly concerned about the extractive industry licence applications in the Shire of Capel for gravel, as I know from experience that it's extremely difficult to rehabilitate extracted gravel pits with a clay base with native vegetation. Michael's 2 questions. Firstly, other than on Shire reserves, can the Shire advise where any successful rehabilitation of extracted gravel pits with native vegetation on private land has occurred in the Shire of Capel?
Thank you, Ms Brown, for the question. I'll ask the CEO to provide your response.
Through you, Shire President, and thank you, Mrs Brown and Mr Tichbon, for the question. The Shire acknowledges that rehabilitation of private sand and gravel pits to native vegetation has generally achieved limited success. We also acknowledge that rehabilitation of gravel pits is more difficult and complex than rehabilitation of sand pits. Other emerging issues include the increased demand and cost of sand and gravel, where operators are applying for expanded operations with increased batter slopes to maximise yields of finite resources. Shire officers have proposed that the Council consider an alternative recommendation for both extractive industry applications in this agenda, applying a new condition requiring applicants to submit a detailed rehabilitation implementation plan to better address these issues and achieve improved rehabilitation outcomes. This new requirement will need to be to the Shire's satisfaction and will detail the methodology of how rehabilitation will occur to what level, specific plant seed species, planting rates, required propagation, and when rehabilitation is to occur. In addition, to post-implementation monitoring and independent third-party auditing will also be required, covering all stages of rehabilitation. The Council will also be asked to consider an increase in the Shire's 2022-2023 fees and charges scheduling regarding rehabilitation bonds. These proposals intend to better ensure that operators not only have to rehabilitate, but do so to a higher standard that is verifiable and more closely in keeping with the Shire and the community's expectations.
Thank you. Michael's second question: if there has been any successful rehabilitation with native vegetation on extracted gravel pits, have any trees or plants reached a reasonable state of maturity and formed a reasonable canopy, and has the density of plantings, as agreed in the rehabilitation plans, been met?
Thank you, Ms Brown and Mr Titchbottom, for your question. The answer to this question is effectively the same as the previous question. We acknowledge that the rehabilitation of gravel pits is difficult, and to date outcomes have been limited and generally unsatisfactory. To improve the level of rehabilitation of sand and gravel pits, Council tonight has been presented with an alternative recommendation to require a detailed rehabilitation implementation plan, as previously explained. Subject to Council approval, these requirements will become the new benchmark and standard template for rehabilitation of extractive industry operations.
Thank you.
Mr Malcolm McAuley of Jalarup.
Mr President, thank you. Councillors, you would have received the questions on notice, I hope. Can you advise why the Capel Golf Club was not formally approached about the proposed amendment to the zoning of the club's land, as shown in your draft scheme?
Thank you, Mr McAuley, for your question. The draft local planning strategy and Scheme 8 was advertised broadly to the community through a variety of media and events, and was set out in Attachment 3 in Agenda 14.1. A submission was received from yourself on behalf of the Capel Golf Club about rezoning of the land, which was received on the 8th of June 2021, which is in Item 14.1, Attachment 4, Submission number 29. The Shire did engage in direct notification of a select list of individual landholders in November 2021 in order to ensure that they were aware of the draft scheme and how it would affect their land. As the Capel Golf Club had made a submission already, it was not considered necessary to provide additional notification, as they were clearly aware of the draft scheme and the implications for their land.
No, another time. All right, thank you, Mr President. Number 2, what guarantee is available that a minor excision of land for sale will go unimpeded under the new zoning as compared to a zoning of special rural as per the adjoining lands?
Thank you, Mr McAuley. I'll ask the Chief Executive Officer to provide you a response.
Thank you, Mr Macaulay. Through you, Shire President. The proposed Scheme 8 zoning of private community purposes for this lot is consistent with the Greater Bunbury Regional Scheme zoning of private recreation and the current use of the land. The subdivision is part of the land for rural residential purposes, has not been justified at this stage, and would require a scheme amendment to a rural residential zone. Capel Golf Club have been provided with this advice by planning officers on several previous occasions. The rezoning of this lot to private community purpose does not preclude residential subdivision or development from happening in the future. For information, a single house, group dwelling or multiple dwelling is identified as an A use in this zone, meaning that it may be permitted at the discretion of the local government after giving notice to surrounding landowners and other stakeholders.
Thank you. Nice, crisp answer. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Evelyn Taylor of Peppermint Grove Beach.
Good evening, Mr President and councillors, and thank you for taking my question. My question is, for the last 20 years I've been aware of the destruction or the continuing destruction of the sand dunes north of the outlet of the Capel River. And that, because we've got a pressure of community now, that is becoming increasingly bigger. And I have furnished council with some aerial photographs of the area which make it very clear that there's a major problem there. So I'm requesting that north of the river the vehicle traffic be excluded. We're coming up to Easter and there will be people staying overnight in that area, and apart from the problem of people having campfires, which they do, there's a very major problem happening because the vehicles are almost to the top of the sand dunes, and once they do bridge the top of the sand dunes, some very strong southeasterly winds over winter are going to blow that whole area out to the north. So I ask council to give that their urgent attention.
Thank you, Ms Taylor, for the question. The issue with some four-wheel drives damaging the dunes in this area has been a long-standing one. This area was once privately owned, but is now owned and managed by the state government through the West Australian Planning Commission. The Shire's Natural Resource Management Officer took the issues at this site to the National Coastal Conference some time ago, in an effort to find better solutions on how to manage this type of activity. The conference confirmed that this is a national issue and the experience of many other land managers have had, including local governments, was if a site like this one was to be successfully closed, some drivers would just find another site to degrade. Advice from the conference was that in some cases the best approach was to sacrifice an already degraded site in an effort to save another non-degraded and high-quality coastal environment areas more effectively. The Shire is planning to undertake public consultation in the next few months to find out from the community what positive and sustainable coastal activities they enjoy and where and how these areas and activities might be better managed. What types of undesirable activities occur and where, and how this antisocial behaviour might be better controlled and managed. The Shire will use this information from the consultation to plan for infrastructure in coastal areas, develop management plans, organise community vigilance, and where necessary, respond with more controlling methods.
I have no further questions.
Sure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr Brian Hearn of Peppermint Grove Beach.
Thank you, Mr President. I recently, on the 19th of March, I recently attended the Main Roads briefing on the latest developments with regard to the Southern Bore route. I may have been mistaken, however, it appears as though the bike paths have been removed from the latest plan. Is this the case? And if so, is there anything the Shire can do to lobby on behalf of the Dullup community to have this important facility reinstated? And the other part of the question is, did Main Roads liaise with the Shire before making the changes?
Thank you, Mr Hearn. I'll deal with that question in three parts. So to the first part of your question about the bike paths being removed, the answer to that is yes and no. The proposed principal shared paths that were intended to run along the western and northern boundary of the Bunbury Outer Ring alignment from the southwestern highway to the Bustle Highway have been deleted. However, the shared use paths running along the Lilydale Road, which is formerly referred to as Centenary Road, alignment across the top of Dullup to Jules Road, remain. For information, shared use paths are slightly narrower than principal shared paths and do not require the same level of separation from the road traffic, although barriers are still proposed to be installed. To the second part of your question about if the Shire can lobby on behalf of the Dullup community, there was a bit more involved in that question, so I'll ask the Chief Executive Officer to respond to that part.
Through you, Shire President, and thank you, Mr Hearn. The Shire has been involved in ongoing discussions with South West Gateway Alliance and Main Roads involving this and other opportunities for improvements to the proposed design. Clearly, the Shire's ability to influence the final outcome is limited by the ability of the South West Gateway Alliance project to fund any solutions required. Given the recent announcement of additional federal funding for the project as part of the 2022 budget announcements of $320 million, it is the intention of the Shire of Capel to request that Southern Gateway Alliance reassess the viability of the principal shared path network for Bore South.
Thank you, CEO. Mr. President.
Sure. Just to the third part of your question about Main Roads liaising with the Shire, again, I'll ask the Chief Executive Officer to answer that.
Thank you, Shire President. Through you, Mr. Hearn, it's important for the purpose of clarity to recognise that all decisions related to the final design of the bore are the responsibility of Southern Gateway Alliance under the design and construct contract with Main Roads WA. With this in mind, the Shire was and still is involved in several technical working groups. One of those working groups was the Bunbury Outer Ring Road Path Review. The Shire has and continues to express its support for the proposed principal shared path network. Unfortunately, due to budget considerations at that previous point in time, those suggestions were unable to be entertained by the South West Gateway Alliance. But as I said, given the budget top-up that's recently occurred, we'll be again raising the reinstatement of those principal shared path networks with Southern Gateway Alliance.
Thank you, sir.
Elizabeth Hemsley of Capel.
Ms. Hemsley, 8 Farley Road, Capel. Thank you. Thank you for allowing me to put in a question, but I really came all to tell a story rather than a question. I'll word my question first and then I'll tell you the story behind it. Is there some way we can expedite action from Main Roads regarding the reduction of the speed limit along a stretch of forest highway that features entry points for residents of Capel, preferably before an inevitable fatal accident? I'm not the first person to draw attention to the fact of the pretty scary efforts one has to go to cross the highway, either to go from Capel to Bunbury mainly. I'll tell you the story. My husband and I were, my husband
Sorry,
and I...
Ms. Hemsley.
Yep.
What I might do is just ask the CEO to respond to that question.
Oh, okay.
Because it might satisfy your concerns.
Okay.
But we're more than happy to hear your issues. Yep.
Thank you, Mrs. Hemsley, and through you, Shire President. The Shire's been in constant communication with Main Roads WA on this and other matters relative to speed zones near and from the Capel Town Centre. Information that's been provided to Council is that there was the intention of Main Roads to commence a study following some of the major dual lane duplications to the south. We understand that the commencement of that study is several months overdue, but we now understand that it has commenced. As part of that study, Main Roads intend to hold community consultation workshops and to engage with the Shire directly. Those workshops, and they're to take place in April. The intention with those workshops is to allow community members to bring forward those views on the speed zones on the Bustle Highway, but also to hear directly from the Shire. And this will provide the opportunity to provide that feedback to Main Roads. As I said, the study was intended to commence before Christmas and be concluded in late January, but as I said, it's several months overdue. But we understand it is now commenced and there's a community consultation process that will occur in April.
Thank you. The story. About a month ago, my husband and I were going from Capel Drive to cross the highway, Forest Highway, to head to Bunbury. There was a gap in the traffic, and I knew I was on a stop sign, but there was plenty of room for me to get across to the centre point. But the very large log truck with 3 great big trailers of logs coming from the other side from Bustleton was trying to turn off towards the Boyne up Donnybrook Road. I think he probably accelerated. He was doing at least the $100 speed limit. He made no effort at all to take any notice of the fact that somebody else was part of the way across that section.
And I think my husband said he missed us by about that much, which was pretty scary. And I would just hate to see another accident like that. And
Yeah,
quite often it takes a fatality, pretty horrid fatality. And I realise...
Sorry, Miss.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I
Yeah.
don't mean to be disrespectful.
Yeah.
I am very happy to hear your concerns. This is public question time.
Yeah.
Do we have Miss Hamsley's contact details?
Mm-hmm.
If it's agreeable, I'll contact you tomorrow.
Yes, please.
And
That'd be
we can have a
great.
chat.
All right.
Yeah, okay?
Great. Thank you
Sure.
very much.
Thank you. All right. Sure. All right. Are there any further public questions? Nope. All right. We'll move. Sure, you can ask a question from the floor.
I'm Wally Cook from 10 Dempster Street in Gwyndenap. And the question I have is, with this extraction industry they want to open up there, has anybody done a study on what effects that's going to have on the water table and the water quality? Because in that area we're fully dependent on bores for drinking water as well as everything else.
So I didn't catch your name at the start there.
Yeah,
Sorry.
Wally Cook.
Wally Cook. Sure. Thank you, Mr. Cook. The Shire does put in conditions regarding distance from the water table. Given the location of this extractive industry, it's quite a fair way from intercepting that water table mark. There are hydrology investigations are done. I'm probably not the most qualified person to actually answer the question. If the CEO or the acting director might have further on that, we can provide you a more satisfactory response. Otherwise, we can take that on notice and get back to you.
Will there be any ongoing monitoring of the water there while this is happening?
Generally, extractive industries are required to monitor groundwater levels ongoing throughout their extractive licence.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
Any further? No? Thank you. Yes? Yes.
My name is Bronwyn Mutton from Capel. I want to thank the Shire for the efforts that you have made towards main roads in trying to reduce the speed limit. I'm very heartened to hear that there will be a public consultative time in April. That's nearly upon us. I'm wondering how this will be notified to the public so that those who want to make submissions will have full opportunity to do so, please.
I'll allow the CEO to answer that question for you.
Thank you, Shire President. Through you, Mrs. Mutton, I'm sure that Main Roads will be giving public notice to people interested in coming along to those community sessions. We'll also be, broadcasting that information through our social media channels and information channels. However, if there's any member of the community that are interested in participating in those community consultation sessions, you can leave your contact details with us and we can make sure that you're aware when they're occurring and at what time.
All right. Are there any further public questions? No? All right, we'll move on to item 5, applications for leave of absence. There is a request from Councillor Sciano. So,
yes, just for April.
For the April Ordinary Council meeting?
Ordinary meeting this year.
Sure. So, is there a mover for that? Councillor McCleary. Seconder, Councillor Terrantroy. All those in favour? That's carried unanimous. Are there any further applications for leave of absence? No. All right, move on to declarations of interest. Received a few. We have a impartiality interest from Councillor Noonan in item 11.1. newspaper community recognition and support. A declaration from impartiality declaration from Councillor Mogg in agenda item 11.1. A impartiality declaration from Councillor Dillon in item 14.1. A proximity interest from Councillor Kitchen in item 14.5. A proximity interest from Councillor Kitchen in item 14.6. And a proximity interest from Councillor Sciano in item 14.7. Notice of items to be discussed behind closed doors. There are none. We now move on to confirmation of the ordinary council meeting minutes from February 2022. Is there a mover for that? Councillor McCleary. Is there a seconder? Councillor Dillon. Does the mover wish to speak to that? Seconder. Is there any discussion on that item? Nope. I'll put that to the vote. Those in favour? And that's carried unanimous. Item 9, announcements by the presiding member without discussion. I do just have a few. Tonight on the agenda there's a proposed amendment to item 11.1 that has been changed by the submitter of that motion. 14.1, the local planning strategy. The Shire officers have provided an updated recommendation. 14.2, Lot 393 Lowry Road Extractive Industry. There is an updated recommendation from Shire officers. 14.3, Lot 287 Lowry Road, the Extractive Industry. There is an updated recommendation from Shire officers. And 15.10, the rating policy. There is an updated recommendation from Shire officers. Just one other thing. This will be also the last council meeting where we are joined by the Acting Director of Infrastructure and Development, Mr. Kristen McKechnie. We'd like to thank you for your service to the position as we've attempted to fulfil the substantive role. Your work ethic and resourcefulness has not gone unnoticed. Thank you. Well, item 10, petitions, deputations and presentations. We have 4 presentations tonight. The first from Mr. Brian Hearn on item 11.1.
Thank you, President Doug and councillors, and thank you for allowing me to speak in relation to item 11.1, titled Newsletter Editor Honorariums. Tonight's proposal, no matter how well intentioned it may be, in my opinion preempts, and one could say distracts from purposeful consideration and could presume to be a policy or part of a policy on how best to communicate with ratepayers when the importance of a communication strategy is yet to be clarified or approved by Council. The reason I say this is because at the annual electors meeting of March 3rd, 2021, a motion was carried by electors concerning a communication plan. The motion was that the Shire of Capel develop a strategy, standards and procedures for proactive, regular, constructive communication measures with Capel Shire residents that will guide provision of objective and factual information to inform and engage all residents across all areas of the Shire of Capel on current decisions, developments, opportunities and challenges. The motion was received at the March 31st, 2021 Council meeting with the recommendation that the Acting CEO be requested to provide a report to Council on each of the motions carried at the next ordinary Council meeting. To the best of my knowledge, while acknowledging staff constraints that have occurred, this broader strategy is still awaiting development and is yet to happen. Turning to the motion on tonight's table, I'd like to make 4 points. The first one is we all have a huge respect for individuals and teams of people who produce paper and online version newsletters. The second point is, I'm sure if you ask Margaret Smith and Julian and Val Sanders and also Dixie Turner and their team that work on our newsletters, and as we know, both Margaret and Julian are freemen of the city, what their motivations was, I'm sure they would say they volunteered in the role, as do volunteers, to make a contribution to our community, enabling it to be what it is today. A simple acknowledgement of a thank you is powerful and appreciated by most volunteers rather than a token cash payment. There are many more such newsletters in our community than the three mentioned. The Peppermint Grove Community Association Inc. newsletter and the Capel Advocate are just a couple that spring to mind. Then we have the various fire brigades, service organisations such as Dally Collective, the Surf Life Saving Clubs, Lions, Apex, St John's and the like. Why should they be excluded from consideration? Does the inclusion of just three organisations indicate a narrow focus of what is happening in our community, and is there a need to better understand the role these and other voluntary organisations play in our community? I might add that the Peppermint Grove Community Association newsletter was probably about 6 to 8 years ago, no longer received support from the Shire for printing or paper. And at that stage, we decided to go online, and it's been online ever since. The fourth point I want to make, the less said about editorial independence of newsletters, the better. Suffice to say that some provide a sense of what can be achieved together, while others, at times, have seemed more intent on providing sectional and personal agendas that have a selective factual bias with resulting impacts similar to the worst of what we've seen on Facebook. Does the Shire want to be seen supporting and take responsibility for this type of comment? So what are we looking for with our communication? Should the Shire again publish a regular newsletter, as has occurred in the past, as a small part of our communication plan? Whilst acknowledging that some matters are confidential in the monthly information booklet provided to Council on a variety of topics, should this information be shared in some form with ratepayers as part of a communication plan? Unlike in the past, does the Shire now have the computer platform, capacity, programs and IT expertise to develop blanket newsletter email coverage to ratepayers, or at the very least an opt-in, opt-out option for topics of interest? Obviously, hardware and software capabilities form a major component of the IT plan and the communication plan. If your hardware and software don't work, well, forget about your communication. Those who read council magazines and online Australian-wide publications sent to councillors may have noticed a recent article detailing innovative cost-saving IT solutions as a way forward for local government. The article highlighted, for example, that some councils are now billing 100% of rate assessment notices online. It also highlighted the many other services available. This is all part of communication. An example included dog registrations, where not only do you get your annual registration account online, but a range of other information such as vaccination requirements, local vet services, the go and no-go dog areas, and numerous other information that the dog lover community expect.
Mr. Hearn, I'll just remind you, you've got 30 seconds off your allocated time.
Yeah, I'm nearly finished. As the matters mentioned, are the matters mentioned we're considering in our communication plan? IT is the way of the future, as it's ensuring we are not totally dependent on disseminating information electronically. Finally, and with your blessing, President Doug, I will leave you with an example of a newsletter titled Peninsula that Council may want to consider for communication ideas. It gets dropped into letterboxes and is available online. This edition highlights local government's role in urban planning, strategic community plan, bike-friendly paths, lights on reserves, golf course options, planning questions answered, local government profiles, development assessment panels, ceremonies, COVID-19 protocols, Indigenous reconciliation plans, neighbourhood events, and you also have a say on a range of local government projects. It helps ratepayers know what is happening, particularly as is a reference back to a website for additional information. We have all of this and a lot more.
Sure.
10 seconds to go. I might add that this particular local government does not have the advantage of an oceanfront location, does not have sand mining, gravel mining, mineral sands processing and production, petroleum exploration, a rare tulip forest, nor does it have a substantial agricultural industry. We have all these industries and more. Let's sell it by keeping residents informed and proud of our Shire and the lifestyle they've chosen. I do appreciate progress
Sure.
that has...
Mr. Helm,
one more paragraph. I do appreciate progress that has been taken to improve the Shire's webpage and Facebook. We have a great story to tell. Can we do it as part of our communication plan? For the reasons mentioned, I believe it is premature to support the motion in its current form. The motion is possibly preemptive and prescriptive and does not address the strength and purpose of what electors asked for at the annual electors meeting. Thank you for the opportunity to comment. I'll leave that.
Just on the buffet over there, yeah, we can't accept tabled items at the moment.
Thank you, Mr. President.
All right. Mr. John Sordens on item 14.1.
That might help. And so I have no conflict of interest. I have no financial interest in the block of land, and I would be happy to sign a statutory declaration to that effect if you like. My real interest here is that there is an opportunity for a $50 million development in Boynup, and that would have a very beneficial effect on Boynup, and that's why I'm speaking. I have provided more detail to you, but we don't have time to go through that. If we restrict ourselves from going to larger lots, then it means we're totally reliant on smaller lots. And over the next couple of years, there'll be up to 30,000 lots coming on stream over a period of years in Bunbury, Eaton and Austral End. And there is no doubt that the people involved in that will be very aggressive in trying to get their market share. So it would be very difficult for Boynup to compete in smaller lots, and it may mean we end up with almost no growth at all in the next 10 years. So with that restriction of smaller lots, taking out the rural application, that's a major change for Boynup, and we're really disappointed to find out that this is going to come up and there'd been no consultation whatsoever with the people of Boynup. And I'm sure if there had been, there would have been very strong objections to that. One of the reasons cited in the agenda was that there's all these extra costs in larger blocks and that the Shire can't afford to pay for it. Look, I live on a 1 acre block with my wife in George Street, which is owned residential. The only extra cost that I can see there is that the lawnmower goes a little bit further as it goes past a wider frontage. Most of the time I've already mowed it 3 times when I track the lawnmower before they turn up, so that's not an issue. So Boynup is a low, a low density town. If you have a look at it, there's larger blocks everywhere. There are many blocks in there which have connected to sewage. So if they wanted to go ahead and develop, they could, but nobody does. And that's because no one's really interested in smaller lots. They like the larger lots. They're into kids and rabbits and veggie patches and all of those sort of things. So if you have a look at how many blocks have been developed in the last 10 years, it's almost none. So if we get back to this lot 29, what we're asking is that there is an opportunity for these people to make an application for subdivision, so that we can see how it goes. So bringing on a subdivision like that is not about meeting demand, it's about creating an opportunity. I'd have no doubt whatsoever if those 70 lots were available and they were at market price, they would sell very strongly. Now, I've got 50 years in marketing, so know what this is all about. Now, if it were to proceed, it would cost the developer somewhere around about $100,000 per lot to develop it, which means they would have to invest $7 million in doing that. Now, in speaking to a qualified valuer who has a lot of experience in that area and a real estate agent, they believe the average price of a block of land with a house on it is $750,000, about $250,000 for the block, so at least $500,000 worth of improvement. So that's another $35 million that would be invested in Buoyant. So between the developer and buyers, there's $42 million that would be invested in the town, which is enormous for a little town like Buoyant. Then if we add in the actual land cost, it actually comes up over $50 million. So on top of that, we've got, if we assume $2,000 per lot for rates, then we'd get another $140,000 a year in rates. On top of that again, if we use the average density per household in the area, we would have about 170 to 200 people living there permanently once this had been established. And again, they're ongoing consumers in the town, which help the business. So councillors, I better have a look. How am I going for time?
We've got about...
Not very good by the look of it. Oh. Hang on a second. Switch that off.
I'm happy to give you another 30 seconds.
Technology, okay. So we'll just wind it up there. So councillors, what we're asking is we would like that $50 million worth of development in Buoyant. So I asked you to support Buoyant and to support this application, or to reject this motion so that the developers can actually put in an application for development, and let's support Buoyant. Let's see if we can get that $50 million worth of development in the town, because I can't see anything else on the horizon that would even come close. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Saunders. Mr. Jim Campbell on item 14.1.
Yeah, I'm not too good at this public speaking, but anyway. Jim Campbell's my name. I've lived all my life at Pepin Grove Beach. I was raised on a little farm there, but had to go out and work. Anyway, since the 1970s, because I only had a small amount of land and developers wanted to build a town site there, my brother was an engineering surveyor, so he said, well, why don't you do it yourself? You can get the money and buy yourself a decent farm. So that's what I tried to do. So I've done several subdivisions. Our family has built the south end of the Pepin Grove Beach town site. I still have a small amount of farm land there, which I intend to farm until I die, which I hope's a fair way off. Right, now, the comments I'm making is in relation to this Scheme 8, which it appears it's quite a few government departments are vehemently opposing the little bit of land I've still got left zone residential. I'll just make some notes here. Some of the places in this document, it states that the lot yield is 75 lots. Well, that's a fallacy. It'd be less than 40. It's amusing when people make an argument, they always go to the top side to, to try and pull you down. Anyway, I've had approval in the past of that same area for less than 40 blocks, and that was about 20 years ago. It seems to me that the only entity that commented, put submissions into this draft of Scheme 8 is the bushfire mob, the BHLA, or whatever they call themselves, and they estimated 10 to 40 lots. That's about under the R 12.5 zoning, which apparently can't happen anyway. Bearing in mind that I work to the contours when doing subdivisions, unlike normal developers, because it's part of my family farm and I'm very attached to it. In the past I've been successful doing that. If you look at the southern end of Pepin Grove Beach, it's all worked to the contours. In that way I could retain maximum vegetation, maximum topsoil, and in my opinion, a good result for the environment overall if you're going to develop a town site in coastal hills, right? Now, the minimum lot size in recent years has been 100 square metres. Now, I seldom achieve that because I work to the contours. The blocks are normally a lot bigger. People can check the subdivisions that I've done and they'll see that. The average is much bigger. So once again, you get someone saying there's more lots going to be produced and they're going to be very small. Well, that's not the case the way I do it and have done it in the past. Now, in relation to the submissions, the opposition to my development, bearing in mind I have the largest piece of zone R12.5 residential land in the Pepin Grove Beach town site, lot 9000, is interesting. Now, I recognise that the Shire of Capel has no say or opinion or input into the Department of Health, the Department of Water and Environmental Regulation, whatever they call themselves, or the bushfire hazard level assessment people. Their opposition to me developing my land. I realise the Shire has to take that on board. They get stuff from state and federal governments and have to deal with it. That's what the burden of local government. However, previously the Shire, the then State Planning Department, the neighbouring land developer, required that I provide a collector road through my property. The reason given was that the adjoining professional developers could not subdivide their northern section of their land up towards the Capel River along the beach of that land, because without a collector road it would be regarded as ribbon development. So you need a collector road to alleviate traffic and that sort of thing. Now, I agree to that, and this is what amuses me at the moment, because this is the middle of this section is what all these government departments don't want developed. Weird, isn't it? The northern section of the land became, without the collector road, was developed without the collector road. It would be regarded as ribbon development and not approved. That's why they needed the collector road. Sorry, I messed that up a bit. The collector road in question is Hayfield Drive. Now, people who live in Pepin Grove will know about it. That's the bit that goes up near the community centre and it ends up at my property. There's a little bit access further up where it can be linked up. Hayfield Drive. And it appears that several state government departments and others, individuals, are opposing this road going through, resulting in the collector road that was requested to get that developed for those other people not being constructed. Now, wouldn't it be sensible, and I'm asking the Shire this, wouldn't it be sensible to support the collector road as proposed to alleviate traffic congestion and flow, and especially to reduce the envisaged bushfire impact, which everyone's going on about. I don't know how you'll burn Pepin trees, but anyway, I've tried for years and it doesn't work. Given that the northern section...
Apologies, Mr Campbell.
The northern section is now developed.
Sorry, Mr Campbell.
There. Yep.
I'll just have to ask you to wrap up in about 30 seconds if you wouldn't mind.
I look forward to discussions with the Shire of Capel and the State Planning Department, and I appreciate being able to speak on this matter. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Campbell. Mr Ross Underwood and Mr David Lorimer.
Thank you, Mr Shire President and councillors. As you mentioned, my name is Ross Underwood. I'm a town planning consultant, and we do have David Lorimer from Bethany who's in the audience here tonight, and we can call him up if we had any questions councillors may wish of him. at the end of this. Thank you for receiving me tonight. I wanted to explain the late change to the officer recommendation that's been circulated to councillors on the proposed local planning scheme number 8. Essentially, this related to the Bethany site on Norton Promenade and Parade Road in Dalyellop. There's community housing on there. There's also a 120-bed aged care facility under construction on site at the moment. Now, the vacant portion of this site has been designated for independent living and village life for about 12 years now. It's something which, if there was a market condition or market viability for it, Bethany would have commenced with that project by now. It's unfortunate that particular development hasn't progressed, but it is a little bit fortuitous that in very recent times we've identified a need for key worker accommodation, for which there's a severe shortage in the area that's been reported in the media quite widely. So only in very recent times, in fact last week, did we approach the Shire officers looking to use Bethany's vacant portion of the site for this particular use. Coming out of those discussions, we've agreed with the Shire officer support to look at a small and quite simple change to the scheme in order to facilitate what we're looking at doing. And that is simply to apply a density code of R60 to the site in lieu of what's currently proposed, which is R80 in portion and R40 on the balance of the site. Essentially, we're seeking to cut those two current density codes in the middle and achieve an outcome which is more consistent with the key worker accommodation that we're looking at providing. Another consideration is that aged person housing typically gets a density bonus afforded to it. No such density bonus is afforded for worker accommodation. So what we're seeking from Shire is actually no different to the density that we could currently achieve on the site. It's quite a small and a simple change. There are other benefits to it, such as the increase of population quite close to the Dalyellop town centre, which helps those local businesses increase their catchment area and therefore their own profitability, and other such things. So I know it's been a long meeting so far, so I won't take up any more of Council's time, but I would like to invite councillors to ask any questions of David or myself that you may have, and of course Council's support for the alternate recommendation that's been circulated quite recently. Sure. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Dunwood, but questions aren't permitted in this forum at this point.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. All right, we'll move on to item 11, motions of which previous notice has been given. There is a motion that was presented from Councillor Noonan, who has subsequently provided an update on that motion. Councillor Noonan.
Thank you, Mr President. I would like to move the amended motion, which is currently up on the screens, and I'll read that motion. Number one, that Council, number one, acknowledges with gratitude the contributions of current and former editors of the Shire's community newsletters over many years. Number two, welcomes the publication of minutes and commentary on Shire Council matters and values the editorial independence required to facilitate this. Number three, resolves to investigate ways to better communicate, provide better communications and information technology support to the editors to help them create, print and archive hard copy and online versions of their newsletters. And number four, authorises the CEO to investigate ways in which the newsletters may be produced more efficiently and cost effectively.
Thank you. Is there a seconder to that motion? Councillor Clues. Councillor Noonan.
Thank you, Mr President. The Mr. Hearn is absolutely correct in that the council has been looking at its communications policies and how well we communicate with the wider community, because that was identified as an issue over the last couple of years. So it's good that that is happening internally and from a Shire office council point of view. However, the purpose of this motion is to acknowledge and recognise the very good communication systems that have existed for 40 years in the Shire, and to celebrate the contributions that they make. Now, I appreciate that some people in their reading of particularly the original motion, may have misunderstood the intention behind it, and if that's the case, I regret that. There was no intention to be exclusive or divisive or to denigrate or dismiss any other community contributor or volunteer. Volunteers from any other sector of the community, whether that's sporting volunteers or bushfire or whatever. The purpose of the motion was to celebrate. It was to celebrate the good news that we do have, the good communication systems that we do have. These community newsletters have been, as I've said, going for 25, 30, 40 years. They've relied on the hard work and the dedication, the shoe leather of many volunteers. But the role of the editor is particularly onerous. For 3 to 4 days per month, every month of the year, so they don't have a off season like football or netball or anything like that. Every month of the year, they're out there gathering pictures, gathering stories, talking to people, and then putting that information out for the community. So these are our stories that they're gathering. They are good news stories, and with due respect to the commercial media, they're the good news stories that people often don't see in the wider media. They're the quirky stories, the things that make us uniquely our own communities, and they are the things that should be celebrated. They are the custodians of our stories. The archives that Margaret Smith has at her house, 25 years, she's got every single edition, and I'm sure that Julian and Val have the same, and Dixie has the same. They are precious documents. They should be stored safely for future generations to be able to refer back to and see what was actually going on at the ground roots, at the grassroots level. So that's the purpose of the bill. It's to ensure the viability and sustainability of those newsletters. At the moment, there are 5 photocopiers within the Shire producing newsletters. The Shire does contribute paper to some of them, to 3 newsletters. Those 5 photocopiers are all either out of warranty or very close to reaching their warranty. There are opportunities for the Shire to be able to assist to make them more cost effective and more efficient. So that's all this motion does. That's all the motion does. It's to authorise the CEO to investigate ways of improving our community communications, assisting those groups that are doing it so well already and that have done it so well for so long. The reason the 3 that were mentioned in the original motion, they're not mentioned in the current motion, but the reason the 3 that were mentioned in the original motion was because at the time they were the only ones that I was aware of, and the only ones, they all have a like the Jalorup Community Incorporated behind them, or the Boynup Progress Association Inc. Okay, so there are incorporated bodies behind them. So that, just to clarify that. So I would thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to commend the motion to the council and ask for your support.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Clues? Yes. You can reserve your right, yep. Is there any speakers against the motion? Councillor McCleary?
Not essentially against the recognition of volunteers. I think it creates a bit of exclusivity in just recognising this group as our special volunteers in the whole of the Shire. I feel there's many clubs in our Shire that also create newsletters just within their own groups. They spend hours, days running clubs, doing all those sorts of things. And just by recognising this small group in separation to everything else, I'm a bit cautious about. I do believe there's recognition due, and there's a process for that recognition. We have Australia Day Awards, we have volunteer breakfasts. We go through all this process, and that's how we recognise our volunteers. Also, it's a simple thing of writing a letter, an email of congratulations to this group. We noted from Mr. Hearn's presentation that 2 of them have got an Order of Australia medal. That's excellent, and that's been recognised. So, whilst I reluctantly wish to vote against this motion simply on that it becomes exclusive for those groups. And I think we have a process that we should be following to recognise volunteers. I would also identify that we are going through a communication plan. Perhaps some of these items in this agenda could be included into that process rather than separating it out as a special task. I think we've got an excellent working group on the communication policy that we're working through and procedures, and that's where it belongs, not as a separate item that we deal with. Thank you. I commend to vote against this motion, not for the emotion that's been presented so far, but it makes sense to work in the other realms of what we do as a business.
Thank you, Councillor. Is there a speaker for the motion? Councillor Mogg? Yes.
Thank you, Mr. President. Being involved in the Gazette and the issues that have been spoken about in our community, I support this motion because hopefully we can get a resolution. As the point 5 points out, authorise the CEO to investigate ways in which the 3 newsletters may be produced more efficiently and cost effectively. It is a big cost, all the paper that is used to print these newspapers. So if we can work out a way, just like councillors have all been received new laptops, surely there is a better way to accumulate one newsletter or just generate the speak amongst the editors of these newsletters to see if we can come up with a resolution. Because this motion just touches on that. Yes, I agree, all volunteers, all media that groups produce, everyone puts time into it, but this is just an isolated issue that needs to be resolved in this motion, so I highly support. Thank you, councillors. I ask for your support also.
Is there a speaker against the motion? Councillor Townsend?
When I first read this motion, I had a few concerns, very similar to my fellow councillor McCleary. We have so many volunteers in our community who do so much, and so much of it is unknown by the wider community. I feel that it's wrong to single out a small section of people and not actually include the other ones as well. Like Brian Hearn, thank you for your question today, because it's very important to acknowledge all the other community newsletters, like the Capel Advocate, which is very new, but it's online, and also the Pebby Beach, which is also online. Although I felt as a long-term community volunteer in every community I've lived in, I know that volunteers deserve recognition, but I don't think this is the way. I agree, Capel Shire has community breakfast. I've been to 2, one as a volunteer, actually 2 as a volunteer and 1 as a councillor. I think that we already celebrate our volunteers, and volunteers are people who want to give back something, pay it forward to their community because they love their community. And putting a monetary value on that, even if it is considered tokenism, I think is not fair if you're not going to do it for all of our community volunteers. Thank you. So therefore I'll be voting against this motion.
Is there a speaker for the motion? Councillor Andrew?
Thank you. I probably would have voted against the original motion for the same reasons as Councillors McCleary and Tarantaroy have discussed. I didn't feel that it would be right to provide some of our volunteers with a monetary contribution, even if it was a token of our gratitude, at the expense of not recognising our other volunteers. But with the amended motion, I agree with with Councillor Mogg, that this is about, for me, more about finding ways to make the paper newsletters that still print more efficient and maybe a little bit more environmentally friendly. So thank you for the motion and thank you for the amendment.
Is there a speaker against the motion? Are there any further speakers? Councillor Clues?
Thank you. There's some interesting arguments being made. I think I find it interesting because we've had motions on our table before that were things like, if I don't, the specific wording escapes me, but it was thanking the staff for their excellent work. And we unquestionably and unanimously voted that, yes, that was an excellent motion. I don't see this motion as doing anything different. The money thing, I agree, I'm glad that was amended out. And again, you know, the crux of this motion really is to just have a good look at whether or not we can do this any better. I don't think we are singling out a particular group other than the fact that we are currently spending some time or money or in kind on these groups, helping them to produce their newsletter, and if there's a better way of doing it, it might be worth having a look at it. You know, I draw some parallels with some of these arguments to our firefighting policy to pay the firefighters as volunteers. And I'm surprised to hear that there's such concern about paying only one single group and not others, because interestingly, we actually already have a policy on acknowledging and appreciating volunteers, but we have a separate policy to pay our firefighters. No other volunteers are paid. There are other volunteers like the lovely lady that I won't name, that runs the Sea Rescue Radio. Probably the most time onerous volunteer in the Shire. I've not seen her acknowledged, certainly not seen her paid anything. So I'm not sure suddenly that's a drama. It's a bit, I don't understand it, but the point is that we do already have a policy in place for showing appreciation and acknowledgement of our local volunteers. Yes, that's true, and for parts of this motion, I think they should probably just come under that policy. But we do need to, where we can, have a look at our processes we have in place and ensure we are working as efficiently as possible. So glad to see the amendment was made. Support the resolution to investigate better communication and information technology support. Thank you.
Are there any further speakers on the item? No? You are?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. All right. Councillor Sciano.
I just feel that the discussion has I guess, evolved around just simply saying thanks. And there should never be a reason not to say thanks. I've been in a certain organisation for over 10 years, and it took 6 years to ever get the first thanks. And boy, what the difference it makes. And we're not going out there and spending thousands of dollars on adverts and buying billboards to say thank you to the editors. We're acknowledging them here in the item, but the item's not about saying thank you. It is about giving the CEO direction to investigate ways in which we can do this better. So I feel that the argument has strayed away from the purpose of the motion. I'm very grateful of Councillor Noonan for presenting an amended motion, because I simply couldn't, as like many other councillors, I wouldn't have supported the original motion. But what we have in front of us is just, I think, is great. It's just you can say thank you to some without telling others to rat off. It can be done. So I'm going to support the motion that has been presented.
Are there any further speakers on the item? Councillor Tarantroy?
Is it possible to move an amendment to thank all community volunteers and not just editors of the newspaper, of the newspapers?
As you've already spoken on the item, you cannot move an amendment. Are there any further speakers on the item? I'll have a couple of words. Yeah, I think I share what's gone around the table a bit tonight about sort of the different interpretations of this motion, and sort of talked about our community as broad and our volunteers and singling them out. And yeah, I think I agree with the comment that we could not give out enough praise, and I've done it myself, where I've brought in a motion to thank two particular individuals for their service towards actually a local newspaper. And I think our desktop publishers around the district do a fantastic job. All of them, the ones that are actually long established, have paper circuits, all those sorts of things, as well as the ones who've gone online. The clubs that put out their little flyers and updates, it's all great. Yeah, I don't think this should be taken as any way of saying to any other volunteer around the district who we acknowledge through various other forums, to say that we value this group over them, because we certainly don't. The Shire of Capel survives off its volunteers. They're the very essence of our community, so there's nothing to say against that. So I'm particularly focused on one main part of the motion, which is regarding finding more ways to produce these letters with the ones that the Shire actually support mainly, which are the ones that are still publishing on paper. We provide them paper. The Shire also leases them photocopiers in some instances. And so those machines are sitting around most of the time, not actually used, and they get smashed out over a few days to pump out quite a few thousand flyers, and then that's it for another few weeks. So I'm sure there could be a way we could look at that for a more cost-effective method. It might even mean a consolidation without wanting to scare anyone who might be listening to that. It's just part of the conversation to be had. So I think as well this can also be incorporated into our communication strategy going forward, as we're having discussions on that. So I'd like to see this probably actually pulled into that. But I think we can say thanks. We can find ways to better communicate. Like part 3 really just comes in. Part 3 really just says, let's bring that into our communications strategy discussions, and part 4 just says, well, out of that, let's go see what we can do better. So I'm happy to support the motion. All right, would the mover like to sum up? Councillor Noonan.
No, thanks, Mr. President. I think everyone's done very well. I appreciate all the comments.
All right, well, with that, I'll put it to the vote. Those in favour? Those against? That's carried 7-2. Councillors McCleary and Tarantroy against. Okay. Questions of which previous notice has been given? There are none, and there are no Chief Executive officer reports. So we move into infrastructure and development reports. Item 14.1, the Shire of Capel Local Planning Strategy and Local Planning Scheme number 8, resolution to support with modifications. We have had one disclosure of interest declared tonight from Councillor Dillo, and that is impartiality. Okay. There was also an updated recommendation that was provided by Shire officers. Just for the public who are watching this online, the addition is to point 2 to add a subparagraph A to that. The proposed modification, Scheme 8-24, as suggested by the Bethany Group Inc. in their late submission and detailed attachment 6 to this item. And in point 3 has been, no, that hasn't changed, just the colours coding's changed here for some reason, which has confused me. Sorry about that. All right, so that's the addition to the officer's recommendation, which will be included in the minutes. All right, is there a mover for that officer's recommendation? Councillor McCleary? That's the updated officer's recommendation, yes. Was that a question, or was that were you moving? You are moving? Yeah, okay. Is there a seconder for that? Councillor Tarrant-Troy? Councillor McCleary?
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, councillors. Thank you, staff. This has been a long time coming, this Scheme 8. It's probably started when I was last on council, some 10 years ago. It takes a long time to form one of these. We've heard a lot of presentations tonight about it, about what's been put in, what hasn't been put in. The staff have done countless days and hours in developing this, and I commend them for their work. It's a hard task. We've heard about Lot 29, we've heard about other properties, but we need to accept this recommendation as it stands at the moment to allow the scheme to be advertised and put through the process. Otherwise, we're going to be a long way behind getting a change, and we're going to be stuck with planning scheme number 7, which this one is an improvement on. It might not have all the bells and whistles, but I'm sure it's an improvement. I also would like to recognise those people that took the time to put in a submission. There was 150 submissions or more. I'm looking for an answer there. Anyway, it was quite an amount, and each of these have been responded to over the time. So, look, it's time to put this to bed and move on to this. There's options that I believe will be considered as the scheme gets forward. But yeah, look, let's put this one to bed.
Councillor Tarrant-Troy?
I reserve the right to speak later.
Is there a speaker against the recommendation? Is there a speaker for? Councillor Dillon?
Thank you, Mr. President. Yes, it's one of those all-consuming documents where maybe not everybody in the Shire might be perfectly happy, but as my colleague Councillor McCleary said, it's one of those things I think we need to move forward with as it stands and reappraise maybe bits and pieces down the track, but I do commend the item as presented to my fellow councillors.
Are there any other speakers for or against the item? Councillor Noonan?
Thank you, Mr. President. I do support the officer's recommendation, and I would like to acknowledge the years of work that Strategic Planning Coordinator Matthew Wansborough has put into this document. I agree absolutely with Councillor Dillon that you can't please everyone all the time, and that you don't always, in fact, you will never end up with a perfect document, and I don't think we've got a perfect document in front of us at the moment. With due respect, greatest respect, Matthew, I appreciate your work, but I think there are things that we as a council have failed to pick up in the process. I think we should have been far more in tune and aware of some of the different steps that occurred where there were cut-off points for community consultation and for us to have an effective way of changing aspects in the town planning scheme before they got to this point where it's sort of locked in stone. And if we attempt to make any changes to Lot 29, which I fully support, John and people, you know, the people of Boynup, I absolutely believe that it should be that people, you know, the 200,000 people who are projected to be in the Greater Bunbury region by the year 2050. It's only, you know, 38 years away. They're not all going to want to live in little wooden shoeboxes in the middle of the Wanju swamp. That's not the plan, I think, for the vast majority of people. They will want to live near the coast. And so, Mr. Campbell, I absolutely agree that you know, we should look at additional opportunities at Peppermint Grove. Dalyellup South should be, you know, should be a focus. But certainly, I feel a lot of pain for Lot 29 because I know that you had approval 10 years ago. It was taken away. You've had 10 years, Boynup's had 10 years of looking at the East Dalyellup structure plan and nothing happening, you know, watching the grass grow. And I feel the frustration there. However, I've been very clearly counselled that at this stage, to try and put in those changes, it would hold up the process potentially at least 6 months and potentially a year, and that it would be a better course of action to accept the Town Planning Scheme 8 as written, and that we should then, after that, once it's been approved, then start the procedure to put amendments in to that plan. I absolutely also support the Bethany group modification, but once again, I think I can understand why that would cause consternation to other groups who have said, "Hey, look, we'd like to make a change," but for whom the change is so big that it's not possible to include it. The Bethany change is possible. I'm reliably informed, simply because it's a very small change. It's just a change of combining two numbers and dividing them in half. So I will support the scheme, but I look forward to future amendments to the scheme. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Councillor. Is there any other speakers for the item? Councillor Tarantroy.
Thank you. Look, I just want to reiterate that what Councillor McCleary said, and also what Councillor Noonan said. We need to have this scheme in place so that we can, so that the Shire can move forward. Once it's gazetted, yes, we can then do amendments can be applied for. So yes, I don't think we should delay this anymore, because delaying it would just keep us working from Scheme 7, which Councillor McCleary stated. Thank you.
Are there any other speakers for the item? No, I'll put that one to the vote. Those in favour? And those against? It's carried 8-1. Yes? In just a minute? Sure. All right, well, just before I was about to move on to the next item, I just wanted to, on behalf of the Shire, thank you to Mr. Matthew Warnsborough and to Mr. Kim Must in the leading of the team in the review of our local planning strategy, which began in 2015. We greatly appreciate your work, and to all the planners who have been involved, who have since left the organisation, those who are still with us, thank them as well. So, thank you. All right. With that, I'll adjourn the council meeting for 5 minutes. All right, thank you for that. We'll resume the meeting. Now move to item 14.2, Extractive Industry Lot 393, Lowry Road, Gwindenup. As mentioned before, there is an alternative, there is an updated officer's recommendation provided on that. And just for the public who are listening in, the updated recommendation contains a condition U, which reads, prior to the commencement of works on a site, a rehabilitation implementation plan shall be submitted for approval to the Shire of Capel and therefore implemented in accordance with the approved plan to the satisfaction of the Shire of Capel. The rehabilitation implementation plan must address at a minimum the following: A, site characteristics; B, definition of rehabilitation outcomes; C, pre-implementation action plan; D, detailed implementation plan and methodology; D, post-implementation action plan; and F, monitoring, auditing by a third party and reporting plan covering all stages. Okay. Is there a mover for the officer's recommendation? Councillor McCleary. Is there a seconder? Councillor Noonan. Councillor McCleary.
Thank you, Mr. President. As pointed out by the President prior to the meeting, the key thing in the improved motion is the whole lot of detail that we've got about managing the rehabilitation of the sites. This is an existing site. This will be in addition to what they would have had before. I think it's an excellent move. It's robust. It has some clarity in there that we will be seeking an audit of their rehabilitation prior to them being accepted. And it will come with monetary protection to enable the Shire to engage if something happens along the way. So this is great. Extractive industry on an existing site, that's a good move. So I commend this motion.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Noonan.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Councillor McCleary, for moving the motion. I also support the motion. It's an existing site, or it's a site that's previously been mined. The reason they're able to go back through it is because the minimum batter slopes has been changed from a 1 in 10 slope to a 1 in 6 slope, so they're able to go deeper to take more material out. Rehabilitation has been brought up, and that's the main additional condition that's been put on the site. A point that has been made, and is made very, very well in the submissions, particularly from the Capel LCDC, is that it's very, very difficult to rehabilitate old gravel pits or old sand pits when you arrive at a clay base. No matter how much, with the topsoil that you put back on, there's simply not the depth to grow big trees. So at best, the rehabilitation is going to be mediocre. There's not a site in the country on a gravel hill where the rehabilitation has turned back to anything like the flora that was removed. So in many ways it would be almost a better option to look at pasture, returning to pasture land. It's been mined already, it's been essentially cleared. I think this simply allows them to take the rest of the gravel that's there. It's not going to make a tremendous difference, or certainly it's useful getting the resource. The rehabilitation, I'm pleased that there's this new approach that we're taking to rehabilitation, but I'm conscious of the efficacy of rehabilitation efforts in the past. But I commend the motion.
Thank you, Councillor. Is there a councillor to speak against the motion? Speaker for, Councillor Tarantroy.
I think this addition is necessary. I think it's a fantastic way forward for our Shire. Putting in place a requirement for the developer or the applicant to actually submit a rehabilitation implementation plan, and so that we can then we'll check that they do that. They've got to submit the plan. I think it's just going to make it a lot easier for future applications, and this U addition is great to see, and I'm really happy as someone who really cares about the environment to see this change. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Is there a speaker against the motion? Speaker for, Councillor Clues.
Thank you, Mr. President. A question before I go ahead, if I may. Would it be possible for a proponent to, instead of rehabbing the site they're mining, have some kind of offset site? Was that something we could possibly look at in the future?
I'll have to defer that question to the officer, the Acting Director of Infrastructure and Development.
Oh, there we go. In terms of offsets to these applications, it depends on what the applicant proposes. So if they offer to provide offsets, then that has been done in the past, and that those the relativity of the offsets has to be measured through DWER's feedback and the referral process. So it depends on the applicant how they choose to provide the rehabilitation that they're going to do. In this instance, they haven't offered that; it wasn't measured.
Thank you. I agree with my fellow councillors. This inclusion of what I guess for Capel is a new process of having this rehab plan in place is absolutely fantastic. And obviously we all have concerns about the ability to actually rehab some of these sites back to their potential, but safe with the knowledge that some good outcome, or at least equal outcome, should be put in place, whether it be at that site or at another. Certainly shores it up for me that that's good news.
Thank you, Councillor. Is there any further speakers on the item? No. Councillor McCleary, would you like to close?
Thank you, Mr. President. Look, I note all the comments that were made about the rehabilitation, but one of the important things in the new clause U was prior to commencement of works on site rehabilitation implementation plan shall be submitted for approval of the Shire of Capel. So that's something that we need to take note of. That's what's going to happen before they even do anything in there. The other important thing is there's other departments that manage clearing records. Not that this one's going to be changed much because it looks like it's denuded anyway, but the process here is that moving forward, there is already an existing criteria on this land for the clearing as well. So I put the motion.
Thank you, Councillor. And with that, I'll put that to the vote. Those in favour? And those against? That's carried 8-1. Councillor Mogg against. All right, we move to item 14.3, Extractive Industry Lot 287, Southwestern Highway, Gwindanup. Again, an updated officer's recommendation has been provided. For those who are joining us online, the additional recommendations included are Condition T, minimum batter slopes of 1 in 6 to be applied to all rehabilitation slopes. Condition U, 14.64 hectares of existing blue gum plantation outside the extraction area shall be harvested and rehabilitated to native vegetation. Condition V, prior to commencement of works on site, a rehabilitation implementation plan shall be submitted for approval of the Shire of Capel, and thereafter implementation in accordance with the approved plan to the satisfaction of the Shire of Capel. The Rehabilitation Implementation Plan must address at minimum the following: A. Site characteristics, B. Definition of rehabilitation outcomes, C. Pre-implementation action plan, D. Detailed implementation action plan and methodology, E. Post-implementation action plan, F. Monitoring, auditing by third party and reporting plan covering all stages. Oh, and sorry, and there's one other change. The security bond has been changed to $29,205 a hectare. All right. Is there a mover for that recommendation? Councillor Terrantroy. Is there a seconder? Councillor McCleary. Councillor Terrantroy. Councillor, can you please just turn on your microphone? Thanks.
Sorry. When I read this motion in its original form, I wasn't pleased with it because it wasn't. I found a few things. Anyway, the changes to T about the minimum batter slopes, and of course the rehabilitation of the U, which is rehabilitation of the blue gums with native fauna. Native vegetation. And also V again, prior to commencement of works, on-site rehabilitation implementation plan shall be submitted to the Shire. Also the increase on the of the bond puts the onus back onto having enough money to look after that site if for some reason it falls over. So yes, this is a far better plan. I know that I was contacted by quite a few people about this. I read it. I put it away for a day. I read it again, and I spoke to the Shire, and I think it's really a lot of positive has come out of me speaking to people and also listening to them, and then coming back to the Shire, because I'm really pleased with these changes. Thank you.
Councillor McCleary.
Thank you, Mr. President and Councillor Terrantori. Look, these changes are good. I think converting the blue gum plantation area to native vegetation will address some of the concerns. I'm probably still a bit uncomfortable because there is some native vegetation that would be removed. But with the new criteria of setting up the rehabilitation and implementation plan before anything's cleared, I'd like to see that come back to council and just so we understand what's going to happen on that site, because in the back of my mind I'm still a bit cautious about the amount of native vegetation clearing in particular. Some of it looks like it's a good corridor of such, and maybe some of that could be alleviated in the way they do the blue gum plantation, the planting there, but reluctantly, I think I'll go with the motion as it's set out now.
Thank you, Councillor. Is there a speaker against the motion? Councillor Andrew.
Thank you. I don't like this application. I don't like its proximity to to homes and the impacts on their lifestyle. I'm a believer that if I wouldn't want to live there, then I'm not going to inflict someone else those conditions on someone else that do live there. I wouldn't want an extraction sand gravel pit within 100 metres of my house. I don't like the land clearing, even though you've got the blue gums that are obviously not natives that are going to be removed, and then the area is going to be rehabilitated with natives. Those blue gums are still mature trees, so they provide animal habitats and erosion control, and that's something that once a site is rehabilitated will take several decades to achieve. Also, and I commend the introduction of the rehabilitation plan and the requirement for that, But I still have massive concerns about the efficacy of that rehabilitation. It's very, very hard to rehabilitate a sand or gravel pit, and the likelihood of the poor rehabilitation outcomes. So I won't be supporting this development application. Well, and yeah, that's all I've got to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Is there a speaker for the recommendation? Is there any other speakers for or against? Councillor Clues.
Thank you, Mr. President. Firstly, my apologies, Councillor Andrew. I have a mask on and I think I'm in a bubble sometimes. Yeah, again, great addition with the rehab plans. I forgot to mention earlier, I do look forward to seeing that come to council as a policy moving forward on these types of things. Yeah, I'm of two minds about this site, and I'm worried also that you know, if the rehab fails to be the expectation, then what do we do? It's good that there's a plan in place, but what happens if the plan fails? So I don't know. I'd like to see it come back with some kind of backup plan, I guess, for the rehab, something like an offsite offset or something. I don't know, but I think that's a lot to lose without a guarantee for sure that there's going to be a recouping of that those trees and that forestry, so that corridor, I guess. So it's an interesting one. I'd also just wanted to make comment that it seems to be another one of these cases where I don't know if it's the Shire or the proponent or who that probably could have done a better job in communicating with their neighbours what their intentions were. We've had a few of these come to council now where we've had residents come in not happy, residents phoning us not happy, and it seems that their concerns all seem to be pretty well ticked off from responses from Shire staff. So I don't know if things aren't being communicated properly at which end what's going on, but I really think the proponents particularly need to do a better job of speaking with their neighbours on these sorts of things when they're making these sorts of plans, and half their battle should be getting their neighbours on side as well as the Shire. That's it from me, thanks.
Are there any other speakers for or against? Councillor Noonan.
Thank you, Mr. President. I agree with Councillor Andrews. I fully appreciate that we need natural resources, we need gravel for roads and all sorts of things in the Shire. However, I think there are far better places where we can source that gravel, places that have already been denuded, like the adjoining lot 393, cleared paddocks over gravel, and you know, there's the whole Darling Scarp. We can go, there's gravel all the way out to Narrogin, okay? Just because it's not in our Shire doesn't mean that there's a shortage of gravel under paddocks that have already been cleared. So I think what we need to be mindful of is that that there's only 6,000 hectares of native vegetation on the Swan Coastal Plain left, and that's less than 15% of the original amount that was there. The vast majority of that 6,000 hectares is in poor or very poor condition, and the main reason for that is because animals, cattle, sheep, goats, pigs have been allowed to go through that a lot of that bushland, and they've destroyed the understory. Now, the Capel Shire has the adjoining lots 477 and lot 31. I've been for a walk through both of those lots. There's lots of evidence of human occupation or human camping. There's bottles, there's busted up bits of tin and all sorts of rubbish. That can be cleared up. That can be cleared up. What's also there is an enormous plethora, a great variety of understory flora. There are hardly any weeds in those lots. There are very mature trees. There are jarrahs, peppies, tuits, snotty gobbles, banksias, peppies. There are big trees with big hollows. There are cockatoos, endangered cockatoos. There are western ringtail possums. There are huge kangaroos. This is not the sort of place that you should pull apart to put a gravel pit in. The whole idea that if this pit were to go ahead, if this clearing were to go ahead, it would isolate lots 477 and lot 31. They would become an island. What that means is then that the genetic gene pool for the western ringtail possums that are there gets isolated. And that's one of the key causes of loss of species. The whole idea that they're going to replant native vegetation. Okay, what are the possums going to do? What are the kangaroos going to do for the 60 years for these spindly little trees that survive because they've got no gravel underneath, they've got no bauxite, no sand. So you're going to get these weedy little trees which are not big enough to support hollows, which or provide the food or the habitat for animals, not just for 50 or 60 years, but ever. They're never going to return to the sort of bushland that is currently there. You've got to realise that. If you clear native bushland, it is gone forever. So this 6,000 hectares, okay, you might say, oh, well, you know, look, it's only 11.33 hectares. Okay, 11.33 hectares, that's about 1/600th of the remaining habitat. But this is very good quality. Okay, and that's not my assessment. That's the assessment of the Capel LCDC and from the government department. Okay, they went through and they had a look at it, and it's very, very good. Good and very good is how they've assessed the vegetation in those lots. This is not the sort of area where we should be digging up gravel. So I will be voting against this lot, this motion, and I would encourage the rest of the councillors to do the same. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Any other speakers on the item? Councillor Mogg.
Thank you, Mr. President. I will be voting against this motion. I think it's a shame that this application was approved to start with because the damage is done. But I think we need to prevent any more damage being done, and vegetation needs to be put back into place, the natural vegetation that was there, and value what's there. There's too much risk in this. This is alarm bells to me. There's just too much risk. The Batter Slopes, it already has washaways into the Southwestern Highway, I believe, because of what's already been done. Removing any further trees there will create that happening more. Dust, yes, that will happen if we approve it and it continues. Proximity to houses, the people, that community, they have spoken and they have alerted us on their issues. We need to listen. The disturbance to human and natural inhabitants that will occur there. That bush is still vital in its form and it needs to stay that way and protect it or better it. I thank Michael Tichbon, who's our environment elder, our guru and advisor, mentor, and who comes highly commended with experience. I think he's hit the nail on the head with this one and support his submission letter to councillors and officers. So yes, I ask councillors to highly think about this one and I won't be voting for it. Thank you.
Thank you, councillors. Any other speakers for or against? Councillor Dillon.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll keep it short and sweet. I'm a bit like Councillor McCleary across the chamber in that I'm a bit torn on this one, but unlike Councillor McCleary, I've probably settled on the negative. Yeah, we do need more gravel assets to be looked at, but maybe this isn't the one, even though it's a mixed sort of block. I do worry about the lack of the buffer zone, maybe a bigger buffer zone for the nearby residents. I do worry about runoff, and I do worry about the lack of a nature corridor joining the two Shire properties, and that's why I will be voting against this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, councillors. Any other speakers for or against? Councillor Sciano.
I'm going to add to the pile and say I'm pretty torn up about this one too. I'm torn up for different reasons though. Like looking at in attachment 4, I think the best illustration of sort of what's going on here, and it was a bit deceiving because I looked at it and you see that rounded green line sort of on the eastern side of the proposal, and you think, oh well, actually that kind of does sort of take it a little bit further away from lot 26. I think it's pretty fair to say that that boundary for me is a bit of a concern to that neighbour. What makes that difficult is that I think that at the end of the day, from a planning perspective, I think that it should be compliant with our setbacks. So I don't know how strong the case is there. I almost wish that this could, from that perspective, come back with without stages 19 and 20, and then at least probably give us a buffer zone of another 80, 90 metres from that resident. But and the reason I'm so torn up is that I do feel I do have concerns about the drainage. I do have concerns about the runoff on the South Western Highway and some of the issues that we've had there previously at this site. I don't know how strong the case is from a planning perspective, and whether or not we really have a strong case there. I for one, with the clearing, again, of two minds, because I think it would be fantastic to have native vegetation there, regrowth at the end of this exercise by the property owner. But obviously there are major challenges. It's a large pocket of land. They are matured and grown trees. They provide habitat. Ultimately, clearing should always come down to agencies well above our pay grade. But I just don't. I don't know how. I don't feel that the case is there to reject it. But I have some real concerns around the setback mainly, and the drainage as well. So just to add to the confusion for everyone. I don't know how I feel yet. I don't have much time to decide either.
Thank you, Councillor. With that, everyone has spoken about myself, but I wish to move procedural motion 12.1A that the Council defer consideration of this item until the ordinary Council meeting of June 2022. Is there a seconder to that? Councillor McCleary. I can speak for a couple of minutes. Basically, there's a few issues that I've heard raised that I think, through further negotiation, could be resolved. I agree with the comments from Councillor Sciano. I'm not exactly entirely happy with this proposal, but I don't see a case either way for it just yet. So I think there's a little bit more negotiation that could be done. So I seek your support to defer the item. I'll put that proposal to the vote. Those in favour? Those against? That's carried 5-4. With Councillors Noonan's, Clues, Mogg and Andrew against. All right, we move to item 14.4, dog hydration station at Bibra Loop, Lakes Park. There's an officer's recommendation there. Is there a mover? Councillor Clues. Seconder, Councillor Sciano. Councillor Clues. Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Sciano.
I think all I can really say here, obviously, it's been a really good process to have this come from a grassroots community petition, have council accept to look into it, and then to have the staff come back with a solution. It's sort of one of those lower hanging fruit things, but it's feel good, I think. And look, you know, I with the type of community and the demographics that we have within the Shire, I imagine its utilisation to be quite high. And you know, it's sort of part of future planning now. Most estates and developments have these sort of infrastructure assets within their communities. It's just a sign of the generation that Dale Up was built in, I guess, and why those sort of things. I think if you built Dale Up today, you'd probably start with those things. But yeah, no, I think it's great. So, in support the officer's recommendation.
Is there a speaker against the motion? Councillor McCleary.
Thank you, Mr. President. My main concern is the cost per site, and if we're going to look at other sites, it starts to add up, and then you've got an increase, like we've got a $400 a year cost going into this. And I've owned dogs. I've taken my own water, and they've had drinks that way. The other thing, Bibra Loop is not that far from the lake. Dogs aren't too fussy. I mean, the dog I'm looking after at the moment is drinking out of the fish pond. So, look, I've got some real concerns about cost. I know there's, when looking at it a bit further, the prices could come down, but I just, yeah, look, I just not comfortable with it if it's multiple sites, and that's my concern.
Is there a speaker for the motion? Councillor Dillon.
Thank you, Mr. President. Look, ultimately, this is just about putting it on the financial map, and yes, we've got some hard work to do there, Councillor McCleary, but ultimately it's just supporting the consideration of. I don't think it's necessarily a green light. I just recommend that we put it on the consideration list. That's effectively what 14.4 is about, and I'd encourage my fellow councillors to vote for the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Is there any further speakers for or against? Councillor Territory.
Yes, I agree with Councillor Dillon. Yes, it's about putting this forward for consideration, and whether or not we'd investigate to put it in other sites for the Shire that have dog off-the-leash areas. So it's just putting it there for consideration, and it's in response to a petition from a number of, I can't remember the number, but it was quite a few. Can't remember the number of people who signed the petition, but yes, it's in response to a petition, and it takes a lot of work for residents to get a petition tabled, and then we're just, as Councillor Ashley Dillon said, it's about consideration for next year's budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Are there any other speakers for the item? Councillor Clues.
Thank you, Mr. President. That was the easiest item I've ever moved. I think Councillor Sciano, as I predicted, did a much better job than I could have done at opening, and Councillors Dillon and Trantroy responded as I would have. So thank you. I've got nothing more to add.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll put that one to the vote. Those in favour? And that's carried unanimous. Oh, sorry, I didn't see it. I thought, wait, I'll go back there. Hey, whoa. That is twice. I'll put that one again. All right, those in favour. Those in favour, sorry. And those against? And that's carried 8-1. I do have a blind spot over there. With Councillor McCleary again.
Apologies, councillors. I'm just getting up to date with how Doug is running his agenda in front of me. Councillor Kitchen has had to leave the room for a proximity interest on item 14.5. Do I have a mover for that item? Councillor McCleary. And a seconder? Councillor Terran-Troy. Councillor McCleary.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Look, I really haven't got much to say. It's an extensive program. It's a plan for the future. I expect refinement over the years as we move forward. I don't think it necessarily locks in everything in dollars. It's just looking at the whole plan forward, which we have to have a plan. A lot of it, and we put it in for the budget consideration, as was stated on the other one. So, yeah, I commend that motion.
Thank you, Councillor McCleary. Sorry, I get the habit of not taking my mask off. Councillor Terran-Troy, would you like to speak to the item? No. Do I have a speaker against the item? Councillor Clues, you speaking against?
Move a procedural motion, if I may.
Move a procedural motion. What is your procedural motion?
To defer the item to the next ordinary council meeting.
All right, so that's a 12.1A. Yep. Sorry, it's just as I catch up. So it moves a procedural item, procedural motion 12.1A to defer it to the next ordinary meeting.
Thank you.
Do I have a seconder for that motion? Seconded by Councillor Noonan. Now, I believe, Councillor Clues, you get the opportunity to speak as the mover. Would you like to speak to that procedural motion?
Thank you, yes. We discussed this a little on Monday. I just think this is an item that we should have a workshop with, and something we can go over our level of service on basically this whole program of works, to ensure we're not, for lack of a better term, overdoing it in any areas. Just like the chance to workshop the item prior to the next meeting.
All right, thank you, Councillor Clues. I will put that to the vote. Those in favour? Those against? The motion is lost. Those in favour, Councillor Clues and Councillor Noonan. So I will ask, back to the motion, is there a speaker? Councillor Clues?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, unfortunately, despite what we've already heard, this in fact does lock this money into our long-term financial plan. It doesn't lock us into spending this money in the future, but it sure locks us into taking this money from residents of the Shire. And I think doing that before we've had a chance to workshop the item and ensure that we do have our levels of service set at an appropriate level is not best practice. So I guess now, failing to have deferred, I'll be voting against the motion in the hope that it will come back to us after such time as we've had a workshop.
Thank you, Councillor Clues. Is there a speaker for the motion? Councillor Terran-Troy.
I'd like to commend the officers on the work that they've done on the road work plan. I think that it's works that need to go ahead, and yes, I trust their judgment with this, and I did read it, so yes, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Terran-Troy. Do I have a speaker against the officer's recommendation? No. For the sake of speediness tonight, as there's not a speaker against, unless there's anyone urging to speak, I might give it to the mover to close debate. Councillor McCleary.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Look, these are plans. We're going to be looking at them and the sustainability ratios in workshops as we go forward. And I'm sure 2031, 32, we're going to see adjustments before then. So this is a consideration. It gives us a way forward. It doesn't necessarily lock it in to be spent. I wouldn't think that year one, maybe year two, we're starting to lock in. But we also need to understand in advance of these works the design process in it, what we're going to do. If we don't have these plans, we're going nowhere. So I recommend that we approve this motion. We can move with it, we can work with it, we can have those workshops that you were saying, but it's a consideration in the budget, and that's what we need to do.
Thank you, Councillor McCleary. I will put it to the vote. Those in favour? And those against? That is carried 7-1. Councillor Clues against. The Shire President has declared a proximity interest for item 14.6, so you're stuck with me for a little longer. Do I have a mover for programs of works off-road car parks? Councillor McCleary. And do I have a seconder? Councillor Dillon. Councillor McCleary.
Thanks again, Mr. Vice President. It's feeling a bit like deja vu with the moving and seconding. Look, again, it's a for a consideration. I do have concerns with some of the program in here, and maybe we need to workshop the details of that, but we need to move forward in the consideration of budget planning as such. So, yeah, look, this is a program of works. We can have that discussion in workshops. So I commend the motion.
Councillor Dillon, do you have anything to add? No, you reserve your right. Do I have a speaker against? I saw Councillor Noonan's hand up just first. Councillor Noonan.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. One of the points on this motion that I'd like to draw councillors' attention to is the sustainability ratio. Now, we've been hammered with the importance of getting that sustainability ratio up to as near as 1 as is physically and emotionally and mentally possible for the duration of the time that we're here. And we've constantly been told that, you know, Capel, that the skies are going to fall in because our sustainability ratios are, you know, 0.4, 0.5, whatever. Then you look at this motion and you see a sustainability ratio out in 2030-31 and it's 4.72. Now, and obviously I brought this up with the council officers and I was very pleased with the response that I got, although I don't quite understand the maths. I'm sure it's a complicated formula, but the closer you get to the 4.7, the more it disappears into the distance, and it always ends up becoming just 1 anyway. My real concern is that I've looked at a lot of these car parks that are down for work to be done, and I honestly don't think, even assessing them, looking at with my very amateurish understanding, even using the road visual condition assessment document that WA.GOV puts out, these car parks are, a lot of them are not in desperate need of repair at this stage. Now, they may well be in 2 years, they may well be in 3 years, or in 5 years, whatever. However, my concern is that, along with Councillor Clues, that we're locking in big sums of money and saying we want this in the budget because that's the plan, that we're going to redo this car park. I would be happy, and I'm not quite convinced that this is the case, but I would be happy to support this if I knew that, if I could be reassured that, look, the car park, you're right, the infant health car park, it doesn't need to be done. So the money that we allocated for that, instead of doing that, we're going to put that into the bike paths at Peppy Grove Beach. We're going to get stuck into the Maloka Up Trail earlier. And I think that that's a far more important priority that the council should have. With the advent of electric scooters and electric skateboards and electric bikes. There are a lot more kids zipping around the place and on roads. With the main roads extending or widening Bustle Highway, that has had an unfortunate impact of bringing out a lot more cyclists riding from Bustleton to Bunbury and Stratham and all sorts of way in between. But the problem is that the chip seal that they put on the left-hand side of the road is so rough that cyclists don't actually ride closest to the gravel. They ride where they would have ridden before, which is only about a foot off the white line from the road. I don't understand why main roads put the asphalt, the smooth hot mix, why they put that over on
Point of order,
the
Mr. Vice
left-hand
President. We're going off on a tangent now to the reason for the motion. We're talking cycle paths and not parks.
I don't want to action a point of order, but I will just remind the councillor that there's 5 minutes of speaking.
Yeah.
And you have hit 5 minutes, so I'll ask that you
I'll wrap it up.
make your final remarks.
Yeah, I just think that there's probably better places, more important places that this money could be spent. Thank you.
Do I have a speaker for the recommendation? Yep, Councillor Terran-Troy.
This is another program of works. We can still look at these things when they come individually to council if they do. But we've got to, I'm for letting this program of works progress forward so that we can look at any grant funding that we might be available to apply for. So, yeah, I'm for the motion.
Do I have a speaker against? Councillor Clues.
Thank you, Chair. Once again, we're hearing this is just a plan. We can look at it later, these sorts of things. This is a plan to start taking money for these things. That's what this is. This goes in a long-term financial plan. The expectation is the rates increase to account for this money that we're now... apparently it's nearly $900,000 over 10 years. On an item that we haven't workshopped, we haven't had a close look at. We can't sit here at this table and guarantee that we're happy with every single item in it. We're already hearing from other councillors they're not happy. So by approving this, we would be approving an item to start taking more money from residents on items we don't know about. I won't vote for that.
Do I have a speaker for the recommendation? I might just take the opportunity then to speak in favour. I guess I don't. I feel for Councillor Clues' concerns around what the commitment really is around these plans. Personally, my feeling is that these plans have, and I've had the opportunity to do it 6 times now. I see these plans every year. So personally, I'm comfortable with what's put in front of me. We've had the off-road car park thing comes up quite a bit. I think from a service perspective as well, I think it's a greatly important asset within the Shire. When we're thinking off-road car park, you've got to think about the gravel pits that you usually have out the front of Forest Beach, or all those things that people use to access the environment, access our coastline. You probably don't realise every day how much work goes into maintaining those assets. Yeah, this is a plan. I think it does make a bit of a commitment. It doesn't surprise me, the commitment, to be honest. I think that's probably where I feel a little different. But yeah, look, I'm going to support it. It's a program of works. It does put us in a position when you've got these things laid out, and you do need to have these things laid out for 10 years' time. So relatively small, in the scheme of things, it's a relatively small commitment for consideration in the budget as well. Off-road car parks definitely far from one of our most pricey things. I think when we come back to sustainability ratio, and I said to councillors in discussions the other week, for me, some of the priorities for places that we have to do work are roads. And to me, these sort of fall under the same thing. At the end of the day, for some we've got to put some gravel down, for some we've got to put some asphalt down. But these are things that, for some reason, I guess because we spend so much time on them, when the service delivery goes down or the service standard goes down, oh boy, do you hear about it. So I think these are greatly important, and I think that's why there's a priority that we do have to try and improve and invest more in these assets, particularly roads. We've already dealt with that. So look, I'm pretty comfortable with the officer's recommendation, so I'll support it tonight, and I'll call for, is there a speaker against the officer's recommendation? Councillor Andrews.
Thank you. I'll be voting against the motion as well. I do think I look at some of these car parks that are listed, even within the 2022, 23, 24 financial year. And unfortunately, I just feel like there is better ways that we could spend the money. For example, the Rich Road car park at Stratham Beach. I live in Stratham. There's $47,000 to re-bitumise that car park. I would imagine that a much better use of those funds, for example, would be dealing with the antisocial behaviour and the erosion created by cars going where they're not meant to, for example, actually on the beach, rather than repaving a car park that I drive on very, very regularly to get my car onto the beach. There's no way that I think that car park needs to be resealed next year at a cost of $50,000. So I agree with Councillors Noonan and Clues. I think that there are some much better ways to be spending these funds, whether it be bike paths or completely different projects like looking at the erosion of our beaches or our natural resources. But unfortunately, I won't be supporting this motion.
Thank you, Councillor Andrew. Do I have a speaker for the motion? No. I would like to then give it to the mover, Councillor McCleary, to close debate.
Thank you, Councillor Ciano. Look, there are a few things, and as pointed out, it's for consideration. We did the same thing with the dog drinking fountain, so there's still opportunity to have those discussions with the staff and what gets included and what doesn't, and I think if you've got justified reasons to pull a car park out, then let's have that discussion in the budget setting papers and maybe outside of doing this. So yeah, look, I recommend this motion and we deal with it.
Thank you, Councillor McCleary. I will put this to the vote. Those in favour? And that is, well, that's 4, and those against? That's 4. So, presiding member gets the casting vote. Hadn't really thought about how I would do this from a philosophical perspective. Seeing that it didn't get a majority, I think it's fair that it should, it didn't get its own, in its own right, didn't get up. I'll cast the presiding vote in the negative. So the item fails. Thank you, councillors. Apologies for just that small discussion there. I will now vacate the chair and a bit of fun and games and return it to Councillor Kitchen, and I myself will leave the room.
All right, item 14.7, Program of Works, Paths and Trails, 2022 to 2031. Councillor Sciano has declared a proximity interest in the item. Is there a mover for the officer's recommendation? Councillor Clues. Is there a seconder? Councillor Mogg. Councillor Clues.
Reserve my reply, thank you.
Councillor Mogg.
Thank you, Mr. President. Basically support this motion. Paths and trails are much welcomed in our Shire, and a healthy activity to do and connectivity through our communities. I just basically please support this motion. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to move an amendment that some of the works that have been budgeted for later years, in particular the Maloka Up Trail connecting Peppy Beach Grove, that be brought forward in the whole the paths and trails budget in this program of works. At the moment it's out at around about year 6, year 7, that it be brought forward, and that the cost
Just
involved...
sorry, Councillor, we'll just...
Yep.
Yeah, so we'll just get a seconder to your amendment. Yep. We'll just make sure we get that up there as you propose.
And that the Maloka Up Trail, works on the Maloka Up Trail be brought forward in the program of works. And that the cost for doing this be offset from the car parks funding, so that we're not spending any more money, just taking money from car parks and putting them into bike trails, because I think they'll be used a lot more.
We won't discuss things. Just not at this point in time. I'll just get a seconder first.
Ideally all in this year, yeah, all in the first year, yeah.
All right, Councillor, is that how you wish your amendment to be worded?
Yeah, that the Maloka Up Trail be brought forward in the program of works, and the cost for this be offset from the car park program of works funding. Yep.
All right, is there a seconder to that amendment?
Dave?
Is there a seconder? Councillor Clues? Councillor Noonan?
Thank you, Mr. President. The reason for this amendment is because, number one, I think the car parks will be okay. The risk is low to the Shire for the car parks. However, the risk is very high for the Shire. As I was making the point before, there are more scooters, more bikes, more people riding. trying to get from Bunbury to Bustleton. We know as a council that 6 children have been killed on Bustle Highway over the last 20 or 30 years. Now, the reason they've been on Bustle Highway is because that's the only way you can get from Capel up to Dalyella. What this is doing is it's making an attempt, or it's fast-tracking that attempt to get that internal trail, those internal trails built. And it's making a very clear signal to the state government, to the federal government, that we're serious about this because we want to put money, we're putting our own money into this, we're bringing it forward because it's important, because we know that this is an area where it's potentially saving lives if we can get reduce the opportunity or the reduce those requirements that kids have to ride up Bustle Highway. Give them the opportunity to get off the roads. We've got to fast track, I think, those roads, those paths from Dalyella down through Stratham, down to Pepe. Thank you, Mr. President.
Councillor Clues.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I speak against the amendment, actually. I think this is clearly another thing that we should be deferring and having a workshop on to have a closer look at how we want to prioritise these projects. I think Councillor Noonan's on a good thing there. I think he's dead right about the importance of those particular trails, but we need to have a look at a lot more information than takes a lot more than we can get out of a debate at the meeting. So I vote against this amendment. I believe I moved the original motion, so I would hope to see someone defer it if they feel so, and I'll go with that.
Thank you, councillors. Just what I might just ask is the Chief Executive Officer to provide a comment just on a few operational matters regarding this motion.
Point of order.
Yes?
The Chief Executive Officer can be asked a question. He can't be included in debate.
He's not being included in debate?
So what's the question?
I'm asking him to clarify a few operational matters regarding this motion.
Sorry, councillors, through you, Chair, I turned off my microphone because it was actually picking up the public microphone as a loudspeaker. In relation to the question, the timing of the proposed pathway at Malacup was also proposed to consider work that we would attempt to seek funding for and complete in relation to Malacup Bridge. And those things would then be factored in afterwards. So I guess we run the risk of potentially bringing forward a significant amount of work for council to consider on Malacup, and then still have a basic problem with the bridge. So I offer that just as information in terms of why the path on that section of Malacup was scheduled in the program of works when it was.
Thank you, Mr. Sear. Is there a question, councillor? Or are you wishing to speak against the motion? Yes? Yep. 12.1. Sorry. Yep. Is there a date you'd like that deferred to? Sorry. Just a time, just a specified time to defer to.
Well, I would be happy to defer to the CEO or the director on what they would feel would be an adequate time frame.
That can be accommodated by April, the ordinary council meeting by April, and we can include this discussion as part of the already scheduled workshops that we have. Okay? If you don't mind, just OCM at the end of that. Sure. Are you happy with that procedural motion, Councillor? Is there a seconder to that procedural motion? Councillor McCleary? Councillor Andrew, did you wish to speak to your procedural motion? Sure. I'll put that one to the vote. Those in favour? And those against? That's carried, 6-2. With Councillors Dillon and Territory against. Yes, we'll ask for the Deputy President to rejoin the council meeting. Online talking. All right, item 14.8, Programme of Works, Drainage 2022 to 2031. Is there a mover for that? Councillor Mogg. Is there a seconder? Councillor Dillon. Councillor Mogg.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just remember not long coming onto council how we were briefed by officers of the drainage audit within the Shire, and knowing that our Shire is 70% water, that's rivers, wetlands, lakes, water catchments, etc. It is an issue within our Shire, so I highly support this motion and thank the officer's recommendation and the work staff have done, and offer council your support in this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Dillon.
Thank you, Mr. President. Yes, as a long, proud, waterlogged resident of Capel, I am looking forward to seeing the motion get up, and we continue to work on our sometimes much-needed drainage issues. Thank you.
Is there a speaker against the motion? Is there a speaker for? Councillor McCleary.
Thank you, Mr. President. Welcome back to the chair, and your absence, we missed you. Look, drainage, we only have to look over east in recent months. I think it's an important aspect in this day of climate change. Getting these things right is pretty important. So, yeah, I commend the motion.
Are there any speakers for or against? Councillor Clues.
Thank you.
There's nothing new about this one. This is something that's been a long time with the Shire and with the Council. That I think any work we can get done on drainage each year is a huge benefit. It's something that everyone's asking for every year, so yeah, I can't imagine any reason to need to defer this one to have a look at it, that's for sure.
Are there any further speakers on the item? Councillor Mogg, would you like to close? I'll put that to the vote. Those in favour? And that's carried unanimous. Item 14.9, the Programme of Works, Bushland Reserves, 2022 to 2032. Is there a mover for the recommendation? Councillor Mogg. Is there a seconder? Councillor Andrew. Councillor Mogg.
Thank you, Mr. President. Again, I commend this motion, recommend it. Thank you for the officer's recommendation and work on this. Our bushland reserves are high priority and a high asset to our Shire is how I look at it. Ask for council support. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Andrew. Is there a speaker against the motion? Is there a speaker for? Councillor Noonan.
Thank you, Mr. President. Yeah, if anything, I absolutely support this motion, and if anything, this is another one that I'd like to see more money allocated to. You know, I think that there are things that could be done in some of our bushland reserves, cleanups and those sorts of things that that would be great to see. However, I think it would pay to have the opportunity to do the workshops and some of those other things, and if there's money left over, then I'd be very happy to see some more money put in here as well. But I certainly support this motion.
Are there any other speakers for the item? No, I'd just like to add my support behind the item. It's a relatively new program. When it first started, we only had 18 management plans. I think last time it came to us, there was about 26, and now we have 34 reserve management plans in place. So it's a growing program. We've got a long way to go before we get programs on top of all our reserves, all 180, if I'm remembering correctly, of them. So looking forward to it. All right, Councillor Mogg, would you like to close? I'll put that to the vote. Those in favour? And that's carried unanimous. Item 14.10, the 10-year plant replacement program, 2022-23 to 2031-32. Is there a mover for the officer's recommendation? Councillor Tarantroy, and a seconder, Councillor McCleary. Councillor Tarantroy.
I just endorse the officer's recommendation, and it's to consider the allocation of that amount of money, 36,000, sorry, for the 22-23 budget. So it's just putting it forward to be for consideration.
Councillor McCleary.
Thank you, Mr. President. One of the things that's interesting in this is moving forward to the future. There's a 20k allocation for investigating EV vehicles and stuff, which is a good move by the Shire, and I look forward to the report when it comes back in. And as to the plant replacement, well, that's something we have to do to keep the business running, so very important item.
All right, is there a speaker against the item? Is there a speaker for? Councillor Clues.
Thank you, Mr. President. Yeah, I agree with my colleagues, and particularly Councillor McCleary. It's very exciting times for this investigations into the EVs and what possible benefits and cost benefits particularly we can find, as well as environmental. I would hope and suspect that after such investigation we may find that we're redoing this 10-year plan prior to its end date, so I would hope out of that investigation that's what we do anyway. So again, this is one of those things I would have liked to have had a really, really good hard look at, but I know we're going to be doing that through that investigation anyway. So for now, happy to go ahead as it is.
Is there a speaker against the motion? Is there a question, Councillor Sciano?
So my lawnmower's probably been running longer than I've been alive. So 2 years for a replacement of a mower is I'm a bit surprised by that. It'd be good to get a little bit of expert feedback in sort of, you know, do you just change blades? Can you change a motor? That sort of, you know, what's the go?
Order. Yeah. All right, I'll defer that question to the Acting Director of Infrastructure and Development.
Sorry. Yes, well, partly you're correct. Yes, these mowers do large distances, but the primary point of failure in these commercial mowers is not the blades or the motors, it's the decks. Because of the stones, because of the rough grounds they travel over, the deck, the metal of the deck just gets absolutely smashed and eventually punches through, and at which point the basic machine itself is no longer usable. So there's a different kind of wear pattern to what you might see in your residential machine.
So would that mean then that there's no resale value of those machines if they're practically useless?
I wouldn't say zero resale value. I would say they would be highly depreciated. The return value on them is marginal at best, very small.
Any further questions, Councillor?
No, it was just a curiosity because it's obviously like it's not a very efficient.
Do you want to debate the item, or?
I don't really want to debate the item, so I'll just take that as acceptance. That's an answer to my question.
All right. Are there any further speakers for or against? Councillor Andrew.
Thank you. I had similar concerns about the frequency of turning over some of these machines. The kilometres and hours, it just doesn't seem like it's a lot. And if we just stick with the mowers for a moment, it would appear commonsensical to me, at least, which might be a bit dodgy, that if we're turning over mowers that have no resale value, well, no real resale value or trade-in value, then to me it would make more sense to actually keep them until they were non-usable and then replace them, rather than perhaps replacing a mower that might have another 1, 2, 3 years left in it just because it's hit a 2-year mark. So I'll be voting against this motion.
Are there any other councillors to speak for or against? Councillor McCleary.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think we're getting too fixated on mowers and mowing lawns and the whole street. But look, some of the other things you've got to consider when something's...
Hang on. You were the seconder.
Yeah.
Sorry, yeah, apologies. That's why I got confused a second, because I thought that you were the seconder, sorry. All right. If you're wishing to discuss, we could... Sorry? No, well, we haven't closed... No, I haven't asked for anyone to close the item yet. If you wish to contribute further to the debate, you can ask a question, yes?
Thanks. My question is, at the end of this time, how safe are these mowers after 2 years? Because we're getting told they get bashed about, and if they're putting a risk to our staff, does that exist?
I'll defer that question to the Acting Director of Infrastructure and Development.
Well, I would like to point out, I guess, in terms of this discussion, just for clarity, that the mowers that are being proposed for replacement are being proposed for replacement in 2030. So we're not talking about 2 years. Should I continue with the question?
All right, is there any further speakers for or against the item? Councillor Mogg?
Thank you, Mr. President. I alert Council to look at the motion and look at the proposal. It says the Council is requested to adopt the 10-year plant replacement program for the financial years of 2022 to 2032. Thank you.
Yes, your question, Councillor?
So, if, for example, the mowers aren't being replaced until 2030, then how come on page 213, the officer's comment says that light vehicles are turned over every 80,000 Ks, trucks every 150 or 8 years, heavy plants 8,000 to 10,000 hours, and parks and garden mowers 2 years?
The Acting Director of Infrastructure and Development.
I can't answer that question directly. I'm just looking at the spreadsheet.
Thank you. I propose to move procedural motion 12.1A to defer the item to the next ordinary council meeting of April 2022. All right, is there a seconder for that? Councillor McCleary. All right, obviously I'm deferring it for some pretty obvious reasons going around the table. So we'll deal with that and, yeah, deal with it cleanly. All right, those in favour? And those against? And that's carried 6-3. Councillor Dillon, Sciano and Terence Roy against. Well, who was the one who was against? Oh, sorry. Yeah, there was one more hand over there. All right, well, hang on. All right, those in favour of the deferment? Those against? You're not voting? Yeah, that's... All right.
I don't want to defer it.
All right, well, it's still carried 6-3. And those against are Councillor Dillon, Sciano and Mogg. All right, that's twice tonight I've done that. Okay. We now move on to item section 15 of the agenda, community and corporate reports. Item 15.1, the Dalyellup College Oval lighting upgrade, club night lights. Is there a mover? Councillor Mogg. Seconder, Councillor Sciano. Councillor Mogg.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm so pleased to see this motion come to Council, and I highly support the proposal. And knowing that the sporting clubs and users of that oval can activate more teams and team sports usage and training with having this lighting. And I ask Council for support. Thank you.
Councillor Sciano.
Well, the recommendation says it all, well planned and needed by the municipality.
Are there any speakers against the recommendation? Are there speakers for? Are there any speakers for or against? Councillor Mogg, is there any? No? All right, I'll put that to the vote. Those in favour? And that's carried unanimous. Item 15.2, Community Sport and Recreation Facilities Fund, small grants round, Dalyellup Youth Precinct Stage 2 pump track. Is there a mover for that? Councillor Sciano. Is there a seconder? Councillor Noonan. Councillor Sciano.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think just the main thing to focus on this is obviously it's a endorsement of council's intentions to apply for a small grant. You know, obviously we go through that process. If it is unfortunately unsuccessful, which I hear there's a bit of money going around in the kitty, maybe a federal election coming up, something like that, I don't know. So look, that I think that at the end of the day is the focus of what we have in front of us, and in saying that, I think I feel there should be no objection to applying for a grant. I think that definitely get the impression that council really wants to focus in on trying to activate and access grants as much as we possibly can. So in saying that, I fully support the officer's recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Noonan.
Thank you, Mr. President. I concur absolutely with Councillor Sciano. I look forward to seeing this facility built and perhaps even seeing Councillor Sciano grace it with his bike, or perhaps he might even bring his lawnmower. So,
are there any speakers against the recommendation? Any speakers for? Any speakers at all? Councillor Sciano, anything further?
I take offence to the lawnmower jokes. No, nothing.
And with that, then I'll put that to the vote. Those in favour? And that's carried unanimous. Okay. Item 15.3, the 2022-23 budget community requests. Is there a mover for that item? Councillor Tarantroy. And the seconder, Councillor McCleary. Councillor Tarantroy.
Again, I just want to endorse the officer's recommendation to include the 26,212. Oh God, I've said it wrong. I'm so tired. The refurbishment of the Boyne Up Bowls Club and the lighting, flood lighting upgrade program for the Shire sports lighting infrastructure at Dalyellup College.
Thank you. Councillor McCleary? No? Are there any speakers against the motion? Any speakers for? Any speakers at all? No. Councillor Tarantroy, anything further? No. I'll put that to the vote. Those in favour? And those against? That's carried 8-1. Councillor Clues against. All right, item 15.4, the accounts paid during the month of February 2022. Is there a mover for that recommendation? Councillor Mogg. Is there a seconder? Councillor Andrew. Councillor Mogg.
Thank you, Mr. President. I endorse the officer's recommendation. Thank you for our finance staff that work on this. Yep, thank you.
Councillor Andrew. Yep. Are there any speakers against the motion? Speakers for? Speakers for or against? It's process. Councillor Mogg, just to close? No, I'll put that to the vote. Those in favour? And that's carried unanimous. All right, item 15.5, the risk management framework. Is there a mover for that item? Councillor Tarantroy. Is there a seconder? Councillor Mogg. Councillor Tarantroy.
I just accept the recommendation to move the motion, noting point 1, 2 and 3, to adopt the risk management policy and risk management framework attached, and revokes the Shire policy of, I'm going backwards, I'm sorry, I'm tired, 2.28 risk management framework, and also notes the recommendation of AC 004 of the Audit Committee at the meeting held on the 23rd of February 2022.
Councillor Mogg. Are there any speakers for or against? No. Councillor Terran-Troy. I'll put that to the vote. Those in favour? And that's carried unanimous. Item 15.6, the Shire Policy Framework. Again, this is a motion which goes across a few pages, so please be aware. Is there a mover for that recommendation? Councillor Sciano. Is there a seconder? Councillor Mogg. Councillor Sciano.
It's just a policy about how to make policy. So it's a policy for policy. So I'm going to leave it there.
Councillor Mogg. Are there any speakers against the motion? Speakers for? Councillor Sciano? No. Okay. I'll put that one to the vote. Those in favour? Those against? And that's carried 8-1. Councillor Clues against. Item 15.7, the Shire of Capel 2020-21 to 21 Annual Report. Is there a mover for that recommendation? Councillor Terran-Troy. Is there a seconder? Councillor Dillon. Councillor Terran-Troy.
I would just like to endorse the recommendation. I think I want to commend the staff and everyone who worked on it for the outstanding work for the annual report. Yeah, so 1, 2 and 3. Yes, it's a great document. Thank you.
Councillor Dillon.
Thank you, Mr. President. Yes, I'd like to concur with Councillor Terran-Troy. In particular, compliments to the author, Director of Community and Corporate, Sam. Thank you for your hard work, and not only that of yourself, but that of the team. Yeah, just put it to everyone that we support the motion for sure.
Are there any speakers against the motion? Any speakers for? Councillor McCleary.
Just trying to catch you off guard on that one. Look, there's a lot of recognition in this one. What do we have? 3 CEOs and a process in there, and we've pulled something together after a whole lot of acting in roles in that, and it's good to see that they've been recognised in the draft report. That's all I'd like to say.
Are there any other speakers for or against? No. Councillor Terran-Troy, would you like to close? I'll put that one to the vote. Those in favour? And that's carried unanimous. Item 15.8, the financial statements for the 31st of January 2022. Is there a mover for those statements? Councillor McCleary. Is there a seconder? Councillor Mogg. Councillor McCleary. Councillor Mogg.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Yes. Yeah, you're the seconder.
Thank you, Mr. President. I support the motion as read and thank the staff for the work they do to get to this stage and endorse the officer's recommendation. Thank you.
Are there any speakers against the motion? Speakers for? Councillor McCleary, would you like to close?
Thank you, Mr. President. Yeah, look, it's a good report. We see a lot of detail in these each month, so you can see where we're tracking. Thanks.
All right, I'll put that to the vote. Those in favour? And that's carried unanimous. Item 15.9, the financial statements for the 28th of February 2022. Is there a mover for those statements? Councillor Clues. Is there a seconder? Councillor Mogg. Councillor Clues.
Thank you, Mr. President. Yeah, I'd just like to point out on page 182, there's a graph with the rates and services in arrears. It seems that for the first time that I've seen in recorded history, the rates and arrears is lower than it was the previous year. So that's nice to see, and I suspect a result of managing to keep our rate increases down. So that's well done.
Councillor Mogg. Yeah. Is there any speaker against the motion? Speakers for. Councillor McCleary.
Thank you, Mr. President. Yeah, look, the rates and arrears, there's probably a whole lot of economic reasons for things pulling in there. We're seeing a bit of a return to economy, so people are getting employed. We're in our best level of unemployment for many, many years, so I'm not sure that it's a matter of keeping the rates down. It's a matter of what the economy's doing external to us.
Are there any other speakers for or against? No. Councillor Clues.
Thank you, Mr. President. Yeah, I guess I'll just point out that you know, the economy's been up and down many times, while rates have never been kept on hold, and this is the first time I've ever seen this. So I'll keep my correlation.
And I'll put that one to the vote. Those in favour? And that's carried unanimous. Item 15.10, the new policy rate revenue. Again, this is a recommendation which goes across a few pages, but I'd also just like to highlight there is a updated officer's recommendation on page 192 of the agenda. The last paragraph of section 3, rate concessions and waivers, begins with where necessary. That is being deleted. So it will begin with just applications for a rate waiver. Okay. Everyone's clear on that. I'll ask for a mover for that item. Councillor Dillon. And a seconder. Councillor Tarantroy. Councillor Dillon.
Thank you, Mr. President. Look, not much to say on what is ultimately a big document. It just means we've got to keep an eye on these things. We'd be mad to stand pat forever. We need to stay agile as a council, and I urge everybody to vote for the officer's recommendation. Thank you.
Councillor Tarantroy. Is there any speakers against the recommendation? Yes, Councillor.
So is the intention of removing that sentence that it will now be only senior Shire officers that have the authority to approve rate waivers?
No, the opposite of that. All applications for rate waivers have to come to the council. So it's just the advice I was provided by officers is that it's intended to strengthen the interpretation of the policy that any application must come to the council. Two words have been removed, just where necessary. There is no necessary
it's not the
situation.
whole
All of them.
sentence.
Yeah, sorry, yeah.
Oh, same.
Oh, apologies if I've...
Sorry, so it's purely just where necessary.
Yeah, where necessary has been removed.
Okay.
So yeah, we'll simply say applications for a rate waiver will be presented to the council for a decision. For a rate waiver, yeah. If only such a thing existed. All right. Anything further, Councillor Andrew?
Sorry, the only other question that I had, and I've lost my place now, that I had, and it was about, here we are, the issuing of final rates notices and moving on to general procedure claims. They seem like incredibly short timeframes. Are they the industry standard, or are we going a tighter time frame than those?
The Director of Corporate and Community Services.
Hello, thank you for your question, and through the Chair, yes, they are industry standard. It's defined within the Act in terms of how we must go for any type of debt recovery in the process we have to follow.
I understand that the process is legislated, but is the timeframes?
Yes, yes they are.
So we've got no scope to extend past 14 and 28 days?
No.
No? Okay.
Were there any speakers against the motion? Councillor Clues?
Thank you. Yeah, I don't like seeing the increase in tools made available or policies made available to penalise people that are having a hard time paying their rates. These inclusion of penalty interest rates and all sorts of things never used to happen before. They've crept in recently, and I don't like them. So for that alone, amongst other things, I'll be voting against this item.
Is there a speaker for the item? Are there any further speakers for or against? Councillor Dillon, would you like to close? All right, I'll put that one to the vote. Those in favour? And those against? And that's carried 7-2. Councillors Noonan and Clues against. All right, item 1511, the 2021-22 mid-year budget review. Is there a mover for that recommendation? Councillor Terrentroy. Is there a seconder? Councillor McCleary. Councillor Terrentroy.
Just moving the recommendation as written.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor McCleary. That's right. Are there any speakers against the motion? Any speakers for? Any speakers for or against? I suppose I'll just extend my thanks to Sam and the Community Corporate Services team for their work in this and for their work through the budget processes going forward and the advice provided to us through subsequent workshops, previous workshops. Councillor Terrentroy, do you wish to close? Well, I'll put that one to the vote. Those in favour? And those against? And that's carried unanimous. Item 16, new business of an urgent nature. There is none. Public question time. Are there any questions from the public? Next to you. No questions? All right. Motions without notice? None. Motions for consideration at the next ordinary meeting of the council? None. There are no items for consideration behind closed doors. It being 9:33, I will declare the March Ordinary Council meeting closed. Thank you very much.